You are good to go, Chair.
Thank you very much. I would like to call this Committee of the Whole meeting of November 8th, 2021 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Mikulik, Councillor and Chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. We are meeting electronically through Zoom during this declared emergency period. Members of the public may observe the proceedings by accessing the live webcast at our YouTube channel. Roll call. I will ask our Deputy Clerk to complete a roll call of council so that we can confirm quorum. Devan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Easton?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Regina?
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor and Deputy Mayor Russell?
Here.
Councillor Bernay?
Here.
Councillor Pachariva?
I'm here.
Councillor McPherson?
Here.
Councillor Mikulik?
Here.
Councillor Timmers?
Present.
And Councillor Reimer?
Here.
Thank you. We have quorum, Chair.
Perfect. In addition, I want to take this moment to welcome the staff we have joining us today electronically. Our CAO, Chief Administrative Officer, Mike Kirkopoulos, our Director of Finance, Administration and Innovation, Lawrence Wagner, Director of Legislative Services, Town Clerk, Julie Kirkelos, Director of Planning and Development, Matt Bruder, Fire Chief, Greg Hudson, Manager of Prudence and Special Projects, Melissa Shee, Manager of Municipal Law Enforcement, Mike Barkway, Director of Community Services, Shannon McKay, Director of Economic Development and Communications, Paul Deaney, Manager of Corporate Communications, Liliana Busnello, Director of Public Works, Dave Graham, Associate Director of Public Works, Jillian Harris, Library, Lincoln Public Library Chief Executive Officer, Julie Andrews, Administrative Support, Deanna Phillips, and moderating and clerking the meeting today, we have our Deputy Clerk, Devan Cripp. IT staff are also in attendance. As well, we have joining us tonight, France Cloy Beaufort of AJ Clark and Associates Limited, Miles Weeks, AJ Clark and Associates Limited, Roland Rom Koltoff, Raw Design, Adrian Hosfeld, Raw Design, Ennis Vance, LJM Developments, Leaquat Meehan, LJM Developments, Alan Wintermute, Matt West, Robert Thompson, Lance Turcott, Darlene Gill, Dennis Seguin. We have quite a few here tonight. As well, as this is a virtual meeting, I will ask that we follow some procedures during this electronic meeting. Should there be a connection or service disruption for the chair, or if quorum is lost, the chair and or deputy clerk will call a 10-minute recess to reconnect and regain quorum. If quorum is lost, the meeting will be adjourned. If connection is lost from the chair, the deputy clerk will ask those in attendance to wait up to 10 minutes to provide the chair time to reconnect and resume the meeting. Otherwise, after that time frame, the vice chair, Councillor Brunet, will resume the meeting until the chair has reconnected and resumes their role. Each member of council who wishes to speak, press the raise hand feature on your video call, and the deputy clerk will track our speakers list today and then invite you to speak when I open up for comments or questions. Also, when I finish reading a motion and announcing the mover, the deputy clerk will then call out the vote by reading each member of council's name out loud. Please remember to take yourselves off mute during this portion of the meeting so that you can confirm if you support or oppose. Also, when not speaking, please remember to put yourselves on mute. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? Councillor Rinciana?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an interest to declare an agenda item 5.2 for the application for 3221 North Service Road in Lincoln. My employer, NPG Planning Solutions, has been retained for a role in the development application process for the subject property, so I won't be taking part. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 4, confirmation of agenda. Do members have any amendments to the order of the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to statutory meetings, statutory public meetings. We have two statutory public meetings this evening. The purpose of the two public statutory meetings is to receive comments from the public and consider questions regarding a draft plan of vacant land common to Azalea Crescent, Vineland by North Shore Homes, and the other being a zoning bylaw amendment application by AJ Clark and Associates, 3221 North Service Road. We will consider the staff report associated with each item immediately after each statutory public meeting. Section 17/15 and 34/12 of the Planning Act requires that before adopting an official plan amendment and before passing a zoning bylaw amendment, council must ensure that sufficient information and material is available to understand generally the proposal being considered, and council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of giving the public an opportunity to make representations regarding the proposed amendments. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or makes written submissions to the town of Lincoln before the amendments are approved, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal their decision of the town of Lincoln to the Ontario Land Tribunal, or the OLT. Personal information is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and may be contained in an appendix to a staff report, published in the meeting agenda, delegation list, and/or minutes of the public meeting, and made part of the public record. The town of Lincoln collects this information in order to make informed decisions on the relevant issues and to notify interested parties of council's decisions. It may also be used to serve notice of a Ontario Land Tribunal, or OLT, hearing. Names and addresses contained in submitted correspondence and other information will be available to the public unless the individual expressly requests that the town to remove their personal information. The disclosure of this information is governed by the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection Privacy Act. Our first public meeting is for the purpose of the draft plan of vacant land condominium, Azalea Crescent, Vineland, North Shore Homes Limited. I'm going to ask Matt, our Director of Planning and Development, Matt Bruder, if he could comment to this just briefly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm happy to make some introductory comments, wanting to provide a little bit of context for everybody here with respect to where we're at with this application process for this development. So as we're all aware, it was previously subject to a zoning amendment application, which was approved by council. That's when a lot of concerns from the community were brought forward with respect to some servicing, traffic, compatibility, to name a couple of those. And ultimately, there was an appeal before LPAT. There was an LPAT decision on that, which upheld the zoning bylaw amendment approval. So that's now in place. And ever since then, we've been working with the applicant on the detailed design, which is the site plan process. That's where we look at things in a little bit more of the detail. You know, at the zoning amendment stage, we look at servicing implications and stuff like that, more at a preliminary or feasibility level. And then as we go through the site plan process, that's where we really figure out the detailed design of it all. As you're all aware, the site plan process is a staff exercise with approval by staff, but with just a bylaw being approved by council. So fast forward, we're nearing the end of the site plan process, you know, a few items to take care of still. And we're now at the point where we've received an application for a vacant land condominium, which is what's before you today. And I just wanted to provide this context because really the intention of this application, what we are considering today, is with respect to determining the model of ownership for this particular development. It doesn't pertain to the design, rather it pertains to how the units are going to be owned moving forward. The design process has been occurring, as I mentioned. And I don't say this to diminish any comments that we received that are appended to the staff report, or perhaps those that are going to be brought forward tonight. Not at all. I just want to make that distinction as we go forward in this process, that this particular application is related to the ownership. Some of the other issues that have been identified, you know, some of the concerns that remain, I can certainly, and I'm happy to do so for anybody that's so inclined, that would like to meet with me to discuss them, to go over them, to go over the site plan process to date. Happy to do so, as that is a little bit of it's the design process, and it's a little bit more applicable through that vein. So, but one of the things I did want to touch on as well is the whole issue of construction staging and traffic management. I know that that's something that's been brought forward, especially with, construction happening on this site and vehicles having to come through the community. That is something that I am currently working through myself and looking at opportunities for mitigation. That mitigation, some of the things to be considered. We might look at proper signage and making sure the route is properly signed. We might look at typical hours for construction deliveries, things like that. There's been a bunch of discussions that continue. So again, as part of that process, I am happy to update any of the community members that are interested. But again, just wanting to differentiate what we have before us tonight, which is about the ownership. And the last concern I wanted to address was the one about, I think there was a little bit of confusion over how the units could be built as they're sold. Well, I've confirmed this development being in the site that it is, and relatively confined site, that wouldn't be possible. The development would be required to be built out all at once. So I know that was brought forward a few times, and I just wanted to clarify that up front as well. So thanks for the opportunity to provide some opening comments, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Matt. I was reading some of the correspondence, and I do appreciate you taking the time to work with residents despite where we are in this process. And I do appreciate that. So we have 3 individuals that requested to be included in this public hearing. Please note each delegation may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Once we have received the delegations, committee will transition directly into the report and motion. Our first delegation for this item is Alan Wintermute. Alan Wintermute, are you there?
Yes, Chair, he is. I'm just going to ask that he unmute.
All right.
Hi there, Alan. Could you please unmute yourself? Okay, if we could just move on to the next delegation and then we can come back to Alan.
Okay, that sounds good. Our next delegation is Matt West. Matt West, are you there? I see Matt West. Thank you very much for coming, Matt. Again, you 5 minutes, if you could.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, council and staff. Hope everyone can hear me fine. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to speak again to this development. I provided a written submission. I hope you had a chance to read that. And I understand that the application is for condominiums, so it's about ownership only. But I would like to ask the question, because it did say in the notice, if you received the public notice or read through that, that the application will not result in any modifications to the approved site layout and design, but deals with ownership only. But I had a question about the site plan process, because in that public notice, the site plan that was provided was, there was a discrepancy with the site plan in the notice versus the one that is provided in the Appendix A of the staff report. So I just wanted to ask the question that if in fact the one that's provided in Appendix A of the staff report is the most current site plan and the one that was approved on previously, so that there's no miscommunication between the community of what's actually happening there. And then also, when the site plan is approved and the design is finalized, how is that communicated to the community? For every time a public notice is sent out to the community, it encourages us to respond and give input and ask questions. And then a lot of the time it's like, the answer is that those questions and concerns will be really finalized during the site plan process. So I would just want to know, how is the final design communicated to the community so we see that those concerns that we had were addressed? So for instance, a lot of the concerns around snow removal, garbage collection, drainage, a lot of that was said to be dealt with during the site plan process. So how does that play out practically in the end? And how do we know, and how do we see the final design, how it's going to stand in the community? Being a neighbor right next to the development, I kind of want to have an idea of what it's going to look like in the end, just so I know what's going to happen with the development. So that was my main question, is how is the site plan presented to the community? How is it reviewed by the community? I know it's a staff only kind of thing and it doesn't come to council again after the applications have been approved. But then how is it, I guess, vetted that all those things were taken care of? I don't know if I can ask that question through you, Chair, to the staff or council, but I appreciate the time and I thank you for the opportunity again to speak to this development.
I appreciate your attendance, and I appreciate your questions as a resident of the area. And I will ask our director, Matt Bruder, if he could provide some comments to the questions and to the concerns you brought forward, perhaps the process as well a little bit.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Good question for sure. Typically, yes, with the site plan process, with it being detailed design, a lot of times what we typically do is if any members of the public would like to review the site plan or go over anything when they reach out, we can set up a meeting, we can set up an appointment to do so. We don't necessarily bring back the site plan in terms of a final design, you're right, before council, but anybody that wants to request to view it, wants to discuss it, I'm happy to do so. As I mentioned earlier too, we're not quite finished with that process yet, so still a good time to receive an update. So I am happy to do that and to address any questions that might be outstanding. But typically that is the process where anybody that's interested would come and speak with staff, i.e. myself, directly. As for the actual latest site plan, that's right, it would be the one in the report. That would be the latest. Thank you.
Mr. West, Matt, what do you think? How are you feeling?
Yeah, so it's up to the resident to reach out to the staff to ensure that their questions are answered during the site plan process. Is that correct? So during this time, is it best to send an email? I know we probably can't meet in person, or maybe we can now. I'm not sure of the restrictions in place. But is there ever, so there's no public notice sent out saying that site plan approval or site plan process has been approved and finalized? It's just kind of up to the residents to reach out.
Through you, Mr. Chair, typically that is the case, but now that I know, sir, that you are interested in discussing, I'm happy to set something up with you offline and anybody else for that matter that's interested.
Okay.
Thank
you,
you,
Mr. Ruder. Yeah.
Okay, Matt.
All right.
We shall, thank you very much for attending, Matt. We shall go back to Mr. Wintermute, Al Wintermute. Is he available at this time?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Welcome, Al.
Can you hear? Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead with your comments. You have 5 minutes. If you could keep it to 5 minutes, terrific.
I'll try desperately. Madam Mayor, Mr. Chairman, members of council, town staff, I filed 2 written submissions opposing this application. There are several concerns provided in those documents. I'll be talking tonight about one of those concerns, perhaps 2 if time permits. The region of Niagara has made a written submission and raised a concern about garbage pickup. The concern is that contractors hired by the region cannot turn their truck within the confines of the proposed development. The safety policy is that the garbage trucks do not back up in residential neighborhood. This is a safety policy. The position of Niagara Region on this issue, as it pertains to Solera Place, is not a wholesome response to a safety policy. The region says Condominium Corporation would have to contract a service to pick up garbage privately. Now, does this mean that a private contractor is more suitable for the task? No. It means that the private contractor is not bound by the same safety policies that a region of Niagara contractor is. Most of us have had little kids in our lives. They move quickly. Now you see them, now you don't. It would only be a matter of time before a child chasing a ball is struck by a garbage truck backing up. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when and how bad. The Condominium Corporation is not able to conform to a safety policy of the Niagara region. That safety policy is more than a matter of contract. That safety policy is required to be followed by all persons operating a fleet vehicle by the Niagara region, the province of Ontario, and the town of Lincoln. For safety reasons, the application before the town of Lincoln must not be accepted. The submission from the region of Niagara partially raises a matter about snow removal and stated that as a private driveway, the town of Lincoln and the region of Niagara would have no concerns. I contend that the design as included in the staff report and the public notice shows no place for snow to be piled within the complex. The only alternative is to push snow to Azalea Crescent. That self-serving solution provides complex problems. At the top of the list is that snow piled high would create a visibility obstacle for cars approaching the curve on Azalea and pedestrians crossing Azalea to the sidewalk on the opposite side from Solera Place. Drivers cannot see pedestrians and pedestrians cannot see oncoming cars with piled snow. For all these reasons, I respectfully request the town of Lincoln to refrain from approving the application. My written submission filed last Thursday and attached today with my request to speak speaks about the town having three options dealing with the application now before you. Number one is to approve the application as staff is requesting and risk an appeal from neighbors. Two, refuse to approve the application and see an appeal from the applicant. And three, refrain from either approving or refusing the application and offer to mediate a negotiated resolution between the applicant and concerned citizens of the town of Lincoln planners. The preferred result from the public meeting tonight is option three. The town of Lincoln would not benefit by triggering an appeal from either side. I would be willingly participate in negotiations toward a resolution in this matter. Subject to questions you may have, this is my position in the matter, all of which is respectfully submitted.
Thank you very much. Do members of council have any questions for Mr. Wintermute? I don't see any. Councillor Winchema?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is a question of process clarity. I just, is there going to be an opportunity for someone on staff to respond to some of Mr. Wintermute's concerns at some point in the agenda? I know that as a delegation, there's not a process in place for us to ask questions or for the delegation to ask questions to staff. So is there, at what point on the agenda will Mr. Wintermute's questions be responded to?
I can pass that to Mr. Bruder. I do believe that most of these issues have been brought forward and have been discussed, and it's been passed, and it's already been through an appeal process. I see the deputy clerk's hand is up.
Through you, Chair, thank you. So you will have the opportunity to ask staff questions through the report, as well as through that process. Clarification can be made to the delegations.
Perfect.
Great, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Timmers, I see your hand is up. Do you have questions for Mr. Wintermute?
I don't have questions for Mr. Wintermute, although I feel he's brought up some very good points, ones that I highlighted myself this evening. So from the comments of the deputy clerk, we'll have a time where the staff, we can ask the staff regarding those issues for comment.
Through you, Chair, that's correct. When we consider the report, that's the time to ask questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Wintermute, for coming.
Thank you.
Our final delegation for this item is Robert Thompson. Robert Thompson, welcome. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. I'll try and be brief. I may be bit repetitious here, but I think it needs to be said. I and others in the neighborhood did not expect more coming on Solera Place. With the sign erected on the property in July and then the September notice of a public meeting, we asked what was going on. Now that it is back and there are accompanying reports to read, I want to mention some concerns. Mr. Bruder has explained several aspects of the proposal, and I appreciate that, but there are still other questions. I understand that the site plan is well underway and that there have been no changes to the layout of the site, but the notice of this meeting contains a copy of the site plan without the sidewalk approved in May of 2019. So I'm asking, will a sidewalk be in place? Secondly, with that, the visitor parking on the way in the same picture is shown further east and has only 2 spots when we thought there were at least 3. A major concern to many of the neighbors is the fact that there's still no turnaround facility. As a result, the region will not collect garbage and recycling. And then the town apparently expects that a private contractor will enter Solera Place to do the job and thus have to back out. As has been stated earlier by Mr. Wintermute, that's certainly not safe. The other possibility, I'm afraid, is going to be the 84 containers piled up at the entrance. With regard to aspects of the report, one of the things I'll ask is, there another contractor involved with this project? Appendix C contains the words Phelps Red Maple Plan of Condominium. Another one, it's misleading for the developer's sign on Azalea to indicate that the land just west of the site is a municipal park. On previous documents, it was shown as a water detention pond. Now, I know a couple of these points are me being picky, but I and others wonder. We have been misled before. At the February 11th meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee, the mayor asked for an overview of the whole community before making any decision about Solera Place. The answer was yes, it could be done. We never saw any such report. The Solera Place development has caused considerable consternation to our neighborhood. No one is happy with the impact it will have in our area. There seems to be no positive for the current residents and puts in place the potential for future problems. I ask, can anyone show me a benefit to the current community from its construction? And I'll ask the councilors if anything could be done to improve the situation and show some forethought on a couple of issues. That would be appreciated. And I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson, for your attendance and voicing your concerns and bringing forward your questions. We're going to address those when we move on to the report following this public portion.
Thank you then.
Thank you. In addition to the delegations, we have received written correspondence from Robert Thompson dated November 8th, 2020. Therefore, there being no further information for consideration to this item, I now declare this public meeting to address the draft plan of vacant land condominium Azalea Crescent closed. I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers that council receive and file for information the following delegations and written correspondence regarding item 5.1, draft plan of vacant land condominium Azalea Crescent. Alan Wintermute, Matt West, and Robert Thompson. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bernay?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Miklick?
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Regima?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
And Mayor Easton? Support. Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Okay. We will now move directly into item 5.1, report PD-41-21 regarding the draft plan of vacant land condominium, Azalea Crescent, Vineland, North Shore Homes. Do members of council have any questions? Councillor Gentleman and Timmers. Councillor Timmers, I see your hand up.
Thank you very much, Chair Nicolak. So we've had our three delegations, and I would like to address the questions from the residents through to staff, if possible, Mr. Chair. So regarding the waste and snow removal, and the idea that the vehicles are backing up, which I agree is, very unsafe. I'm just wondering if Mr. Bruder could comment on how exactly that would work with snow removal and waste collection.
Mr. Bruder, snow removal, waste, probably larger vehicles as well.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. So with some private collection options, it's not necessarily a big typical garbage truck that goes in there. There are often circumstances where private collection involves much smaller vehicles that are a little bit more nimble in terms of navigating the site. They can even be something like, half-ton pickup trucks or something like that. It's happened before. So for some of these smaller condominium developments, as they offer a specialized service for exactly this type of development. There's a large radius that coming into the development as you turn into where the parking is, that could be utilized along. There are going to be some opportunities there for a potential turnaround, but I would note we're not talking about a large vehicle here per se. But when we go through the site plan process, the objective on our end is, and on the region's end for that matter, is to identify where private garbage collection is needed based on the specifics of the development. And why this is important is it needs to be reflected that that is the case in the site plan agreement. And then also when it goes forward to communicating with the future residents, because that would be something that would be paid for by the condo association. The same kind of applies with snow removal. There is an area at the end of the, call it driveway or parking area, where there is about 7 meters, a little bit of it's not a hammerhead, but it's a little bit of a dead end that provides some storage capacity. But there's also opportunities for a private company to come and remove the snow following heavy snowfalls to make sure that we don't run into those sightline issues where it's piled really, really high at the entrance. There are opportunities there that get reflected by some of these more compact built farms that can be secured through the condo corporation. I would also note, just going back to garbage for a second too, that I don't foresee this as a situation where there's going to be all of the garbage receptacles placed at the front of the property. They'll likely be within the development and have this private collection go through there internally and collect them. So those are the comments I'd provide on those two fronts, at least.
Thank you, Mr. Bruder. So just moving on with regard to the sidewalk and that was shown on the plan, that is indeed still part of the plan. And the visitor parking, what that's going to look like and how many spots.
Sure. Yep, through you, Mr. Chair. So first of all, yes, that is correct on the latest iterations of the site plan, which I am happy to share, as I mentioned, with anybody interested to view them. There are sidewalks on both sides, on the north side and on the south side as well. The south side coming out onto Azalea. So that is in the plans. As for visitor parking, so there's going to be a total of 47 spaces in this development. There's 17 units, which require 2 spaces per unit. So that's 34 spaces. And then there's another 4 potential accessory dwelling units that were approved as part of zoning. That's another 4 spaces. So there's 9 left in terms of visitor spaces. And there are 3 on the driveway coming into the site as well. So those are the clarifications in that regard.
Mr. Timmers?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sorry, I have to back up just, apologies. I wanted to ask about a fire truck. Hopefully a fire truck doesn't have to go in there, but I know we've discussed it and a resident had expressed a concern with me today about that. So would the fire truck be able to turn around, or will it be backing out and backing in? How would that work?
I do believe this was discussed in the original report, but
Because I'm asking just on behalf of a resident, Mr. Chair.
perfect.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. That's correct. It was previously discussed, but one of the things with these units as well was the opportunity to sprinkler them, which is the case. But as for the fire truck as well, I can tell you that we had extensive conversations about the radius, both coming in and then on that bend coming into the development to make sure the fire trucks could get in there. But you are right. There isn't room within here to turn around. They would have to back out, and they have criteria in terms of how far they will go into a development without being able to turn around. And I believe that was 90 meters, but I'd have to double check.
Thank you very much, Director.
Mr. Hudson, would you add anything to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the question. No, Director Bruder is absolutely correct. It is 90 meters. We don't have quite that. So there are provisions in this development to put sprinklers in, which is over and above actually the requirements for building and fire code to counteract that. And in terms of getting a fire truck in, yes, we can get the fire truck in with the radiuses and the widths, but we would be required to back a truck out if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gemma.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is a little bit of clarification of what Mr. Wintermute's questions were regarding private garbage collection and snow removal. So through to Mr. Bruder, are there any other examples of condo developments, condominium developments in Lincoln that you can think of that have private garbage collection and snow removal?
Mr. Bruder.
Yep, through you, Mr. Chair. There's a couple that I can think of just off the top of my head, and I'd probably have to do a little bit more delving into it to see a few more. I know that Centerville, the development in Beamsville and behind there, they need private collection there because they have specialized waste receptacles that require a little bit of a different movement than a regional vehicle could provide. So that is one of the sites. There's also Kingsway in Jordan that will be required to have private garbage collection. As for snow removal, I'd have to get back to you on some examples, but I'm sure there are some out there. I know that, when we go through site plans like this, I have had some dialogue with some other municipalities just to, see what they're dealing with during their site plan processes. And it's not an unusual thing as part of some of these condominium applications.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking of the one beside the Jacob, in the corner of Lincoln Square. That's been there for a number of years, and I think I haven't heard concerns about their garbage collection, and it's a similar kind of development. I think it has a private road, and so and I say that just to sort of try to alleviate some of Mr. Wintermute's concerns that there are existing developments that are set up in much the same way. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair Meglick. Just a quick question directed through you, Chair Meglick, to either Mr. Bruder or Mr. Koplitz. In one of the correspondence regarding this project, there was a question regarding the competence of town staff with regards to reviewing engineers' reports. I just wondered if you can make a comment to that.
Mr. Kirkopoulos, I see you have your hand up.
I do, through you, Mr. Chair. And so to Councillor Reimer, I'm going to tend to disagree with Mr. Wintermute as it pertains to that. I think when town staff feel that something is outside of our core competency, as identified by all the governing bodies we have, only in those cases would we enlist the consultant to complete the peer review on our behalf. In most cases, though, we are qualified to complete that review. We do have engineers on staff. And so I want to put Mr. Wintermute's mind at ease and anyone else's that we do have the core competencies as staff to review things submitted by a civil engineer.
Councillor Reimer.
Mr. Bruder has his hand up as well.
Oh,
Chairman
Mr.
Mick.
Bruder, sorry, I didn't see.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just further to those comments, I also wanted to note that when we have deliverables submitted to us, some of those technical requirements, I'm thinking about, servicing connections, and thinking about grading, all those things. We also require that they are completed when they're submitted to us by a certified professional as well. So there's also that layer too for incoming materials. So I just wanted to highlight that as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Bruder. Thank you, Chair McClick.
You're welcome. Deputy Mayor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I'm going to again go back to Mr. Wintermute's questions. Again, I know that it's kind of been hit on a few times, but this is more of a specific. I'm just wondering, and we've heard this before with other developments, when we hear a developer say, "Well, again, we only have so many parking spaces, and if a resident has more than one space, and this place isn't for them." And I heard when you were mentioning about the garbage pickup saying, well, there are other options that they could proceed with. They could go with a smaller dump truck, a smaller snow removal machine. But are there any realistic implications if they don't? So if all of a sudden this gets approved and they hire a private contractor to come in, they're coming in with a full dump truck backing it out as is a concern of some of the residents. Does the town have any ability to influence that and ensure that they are using a safe protocol or a safe alternative as opposed to that large dump truck that, again, as Mr. Wintermute says, goes against some of the health and safety standards of the region?
Mr. Bruder?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I would have to say, working in the industry as a private garbage collector, I think they have to devise what's most safe and what the best option is for that particular development. That's why they get paid what they get paid. I think if they were operating with a vehicle that's going to result in unsafe backing out or unsafe interactions, I don't know if they'd be in business for very long. So I think to some degree that's regulated a little bit by the practice of private garbage collection itself. That said, though, although we haven't typically included some clauses to that effect in the site plan agreement, because that is our understanding, I mean, we can certainly explore the option of doing so.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bruder. And through you, Mr. Chair, again, I think that would just maybe help alleviate some of those concerns, because we have seen in numerous cases where after the fact, once these are completed, again, it gets left up to sometimes the lowest denominator, and we want to make sure that we are always doing the best for our residents. So I thank you for that response.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Russell. Councillor Pachariva.
Thanks, Chair McCluck. Through you to Mr. Bruder. So the report, Matt, in itself is asking for a vacant land condominium, correct? And so that allows units to be constructed as they sell. And that was a big crux. And then in your notes later on, they're not going to do that. So why not just apply for the standard condominium? And that would alleviate a lot of the resident stress on this being, built in phases as they're sold, as opposed to the other, which is all built at once. I mean, they tell us one thing, and how to, the other form would hold them to it.
Mr. Bruder.
Through you, Mr. Chair, they came forward with an application at this time, and the reason why they're coming forward with a vacant land condo application is exactly that, because the lands are currently vacant. A lot of times with the standard condominium application, there's already typically a building there. So at the time, now that they're coming forward with ownership, I mean, I got to be honest with you, usually it gets done even earlier than this. It gets done in tandem with the zoning bylaw amendment process a lot of the times. The earlier reference to Red Maple, for example, that's what happened there for that development. So, I know that kind of phrase has caused some consternation, and it's unfortunate that it did. But at the end of the day, as I've clarified anyway, the site, just by the nature of how it is, like, we wouldn't be able to grant any occupancies while there's still units to be built, just because the site wouldn't safely lend itself to that. And to that, even further, I did even correspond with the applicant on this, and they understood exactly where we were coming from, and never intended on selling it piecemeal anyways. They know that it all needs to be done in one shot as well. So
okay,
hopefully that clarifies a little bit.
Okay, thank you. And through you, Chair McCluck, one more, if I may.
Yes. Yep.
And just to Mr. Prinson's letter, piece of correspondence, he was worried about being directly next to the proposed roadway, about vehicle stopping, and in the development beside the Jacob, which is a plan of condominium, the developer installed their own speed bumps within that. And one is right at the intersection where the development leaves and enters onto Alyssa. Could we put this in site plan agreement that we require the same?
Bruder?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that's a good time to raise that, and I think it's something that can definitely be included in our deliberations as we finalize the site plan. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to look at, just kind of at the entrance to the site. So certainly we'll carry that forward.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brunet?
Thank you, Chair Michalak. Through you to staff, and I might have missed it, but Mr. Thompson raised a couple of questions with regards to changes from the original site plan regarding a sidewalk that appeared in 2019, but now to his comment is missing, as well as changes to visitor parking, moved further to the east side, 2 spots instead of 3. I'm wondering if staff could comment on that.
Mr. Bruder, I believe. Yeah, go ahead.
Yep, certainly, Mr. Chair. So yeah, I can confirm there is going to be a sidewalk on both the north and south areas of where the driveway into the development is. The one on the south will connect out to Azalea, and also there will be those 3 visitor parking spaces on your way in as well. So yeah, I definitely make those clarifying points. They are in the latest version of the site plan. And as I mentioned, just to make sure that there's no further confusion, should anybody want to view the site plan, I can certainly coordinate with them to make sure that happens.
Okay, great. Through you, Chair Michalak, I just wanted to make a comment that I think it's really important, and I take my hat off to Director Bruder in the way he answered Mr. West, in that he's willing to set up meetings moving forward to go over and view and discuss this application as it rolls out. So I think that's really important, and I hope the residents that are on the call and other neighbors appreciate that as we move forward. Through you, Chair, I just want to make a comment with regards to this garbage situation. And I appreciate the comments that staff are making. But I can tell you, I've specifically been involved in 2 situations in town. One at Centerville, because I know some people that have units in there that have had many problems with regards to garbage pickup. At the beginning, there was dumpsters that were overflowing. There was mattresses being dumped there. There was couches being dumped there. There was rodent concerns. Those concerns were real. They weren't fabricated. They weren't something that people were suggesting might be happening. They were happening. I appreciate the fact that staff jumped in and worked with the developer as well as Bylaw to make sure that there was some enforcement and some changes with regards to that garbage pickup. But I can assure you, I was involved in that, and they were real. And most recently up on Vista Ridge, we have a townhouse unit up there off of Connor, where I've received multiple pictures and multiple complaints where people are dumping. It's a private collection coming in, as well as a regional garbage truck coming into the site, and yet people are still dumping garbage at the curb at the road. So, we can say that the developer is going to do this and the developer is going to do that. I think these concerns are real, and I don't think they can be taken lightly. So that's just my comment on that. I appreciate Mr. Bruder also making the comment that this development will be assured that it will be built all at once and not as the units are sold. I think that's a vital concern for those residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just following up on that last comment from Councilor Brunei, I just wanted to ask Mr. Bruder through you, if the units being constructed prior to occupancy occurring is actually in the written agreement with the developer to give the residents of Azalea a level of confidence that this is a set written agreement. I wonder if the director could comment on that. Mr. Bruce?
Sure, Mr. Chair, absolutely. Since I've already, had some communications with the applicant on this and confirmed that, again, not something we would typically include in there, but in this case, I don't think there'd be an issue. So I think that's something we could do.
Councilor McPherson? All right. Mayor Easton? Anything new you may have to add? You're on mute.
Thank you. Sometimes this equipment isn't as quick as I'd like it to be. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. There's a couple of things that I just want to reassure myself on. First of all, the concerns that the public have about the timing and the issues of how long a project would take and whether or not you can move in earlier throughout the process, I think are very well, I think they're well placed. There's been quite an experience that went back as far as when I was on council in the mid-'80s that went on for I don't know how many years. Some of the neighbors that have been longtime members in that part of Victoria Avenue suffered from those tremendous delays. So I can understand why that concern would be there. Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Bruder, is there anything at all that any recourse or any proactive course that the town has in regard to some of the terms and conditions for contractors? I was trying to think of a situation where we might have that in place. However, is that a matter that we can deal with early on? We had some issues, if I recall, down in Heritage Village not all that long ago with private contractors. Is there anything that we can do proactively to get this going in the direction that we want it to?
Mr. Bruder?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, typically any relationship with private contractors and a condo board isn't something that town staff would generally weigh into. That said, I think just by way of communication, we are close to the end of the site plan process here. I think in communicating some of what's been talked about today, I think we can ensure moving forward that we get going on the right path. I mean, some of the examples that have been cited, I definitely know that they're real concerns. I also know that we have been able, in most cases, to rectify and learn from those mistakes as well. So those are definitely things that we can carry forward. But oftentimes in the actual contractual negotiations, it's not something where town staff would insert themselves into, as it's typically a private matter between the landowner or the condo board and that contractor.
So based on some of the experience that we've had to date, you would consider looking at where the town could influence what those contracts might look like. Is that a fair statement?
We could certainly look into it to see if there's anything that can be done. Like I said, not something we typically do, but happy to maybe further review some industry practice and see if there's anything that we could get into.
Okay, that's very helpful. And again, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Bruder, and possibly to CAO Koppoulis, Mr. Thompson had asked about benefits to the community, and I certainly want to point out the considerable concerns that have been raised, I think, to a number of us about property conditions in Vineland. I think by now everybody knows that development fulfills our obligations around the growth plan in terms of the region and the province. But what other items would you identify as benefits to the community, specifically in this location? And I do have the Rittenhouse upgrades in my mind at the same time.
Mr. Bruder, community benefits?
Through you, Mr. Chair, maybe one of the things that might be of benefit too is, I think a lot of times when you do have a condo board assuming ownership through a whole condominium arrangement, there's a lot of pride that happens with respect to the upkeep of that particular property as well. Typically, some of the landscaping and everything that's done are of a high standard, as the condo board is definitely, they are held accountable by the residents because the residents pay fees for these things, which typically lends itself to often very good quality site management. So I think there's that piece. And then just with respect generally in the area and community benefit, there's the Rittenhouse open space there with the pond too that will be maintained as well. Some of the stormwater management activities for this site are tying into that pond. There has been a review of that to make sure that there is adequate capacity and that it's already functioning well too. So that's been kind of a necessary review because not only does it confirm that it can handle this development, but it's also functioning as intended for the larger area as well. So just a couple of things I would note. I don't know if our CIO has anything further to add.
Mr. Kakopoulos?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think maybe looking at it a little more holistically and I think speaking to the mayor's point, when we look at the redevelopment of downtown Vineland, and the entire, I would say, Victoria and King Street corridor, and we look at infill developments like this, I think there's a multiplier effect and a contribution when we look at that. The amount of funds and the amount of investment both the region and ourselves are going to be making it safer, making it more walkable, and attracting local businesses in that area to support the existing businesses. So I think at the end of the day, I think Mr. Thompson raised a good point when speaking to what are the benefits. And I think every time we look at a particular development, staff are looking at it beyond just the planning elements of that development. They're looking at it from, what does it mean for walkability in the community? What does it mean for those private sector investments that want to come and set up a small shop, a small bakery? We've got a large landowner in that particular area that has been talking for some time about redeveloping his properties and has recently acquired more properties. All that works in hand with one another. So I think that holistic look at Vineland as a whole, beyond just this one particular development, I would say is an important element when we look at the positives of any sort of creation of, whether it be 5 units, 15 units, or 25 units for that matter, or 125 units.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Kakopoulos, Mr. Bruder. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I think we all see some main themes with this newer to Lincoln sort of developments that we're coming across, these more intense, denser sort of developments. And we're starting to understand the complications that come with them, the expectations amongst everyone. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Reimer. Council approve the draft plan of vacant land condominium in accordance with the plan outlined in Appendix B and in accordance with provisions of the Planning Act and Condominium Act and regulations thereunder. And council directs staff to advise all parties of council's decision on the draft plan of condominium of the application in accordance with provincial regulations. Note, appeal period is 20 days from notice of decision. And council authorize the Director of Planning and Development or the town clerk to endorse the draft plan as approved 20 days after notice of council's decision has been given, provided that no appeals against the decision has been lodged. And council directs staff to advise the applicant that the town's draft approval of this plan will lapse 3 years from the date of draft approval unless the town council grants an extension of the approval period. If an extension is requested, an updated review and revisions to the conditions of draft approval may be necessary at that time. And council declare that they have considered all of the written and oral submissions and agree with the planning report, analysis, and recommendations, and finds that, subject to the conditions of approval, this application meets the Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Region official plan, and the town official plan. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brunei,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
and Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for attending and your participation, and council for their questions. Our second public meeting is for the zoning bylaw amendment application by A.J. Clark and Associates Limited for 3221 North Service Road. The deputy clerk will proceed to remove Councillor Windjammer from the meeting due to an earlier declared conflict of interest. Devan, please confirm when ready to proceed.
Thank you, Chair. You are ready to proceed.
Thank you very much. So this application is an interesting one. This one is an interesting one as it's been talked about quite a bit amongst my ward for sure and amongst many others, given the newness and the size of it. Prior to this presentation, I will ask our Director of Planning and Development to provide some introductory comments. Mr. Bruder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'll just provide some high-level comments. So this is an application that we've been working with the applicant on for quite some time. We've been going through a lot of review, just it being of the magnitude that it is, and also in the location where we have a secondary plan, wanting to make sure that we're considering all aspects as it pertains to servicing implications, urban design, and siting and massing with buildings of this height. There was the initial proposal came forward with two towers that were 25 and 28 stories with 510 units, I believe. But going through a design exercise, which also included enlisting not only the regional architectural control team that has a lot of professional expertise in this area, but also going a bit further and retaining a architect from the City of Toronto Architectural Review Board to also provide some commentary during this process. So between all parties involved, we've been diligent thus far in bringing forward this application for a public meeting. Now the heights have been reduced. Instead of 25 and 28 stories, they're now 20 and 23, which with 430 units, I believe. Ms. Shi can correct me if she has any comments to add to mine. But at this point, again, we wanted to bring this forward for the first time in front of committee and council for commentary, and also once again, welcome public comments further to an open house that we held for the initial design in August. So those are the opening comments that I'd make. I'll turn it over to Ms. Shi if she has any further to add.
Ms. Shi?
I'll just reiterate through you, Mr. Chair, the purpose of tonight's public meeting and the planning report is to provide community members and members of public with background information on the application that has been made. Also, in addition to staff, the applicant team is present tonight to hear input and answer any questions anyone may have. Just to give a little bit of planning context for the proposal, the subject lands are located within the Prudence secondary plan area. The secondary plan was adopted by Town Council in 2018 and provides a vision and planning framework to guide the development of a complete community. The secondary plan area spans from Lake Ontario to the QEW, from Victoria Avenue North to the Jordan Road interchange area. It is approximately 50 hectares in size and encompasses a number of different landowners. This includes the Prudence landing property, which abuts the subject property to the north, and where a zoning bylaw amendment was passed and a draft plan of subdivision was approved with conditions by Town Council in 2019. So the planning application that's before us today is the first that has been made for the subject property since the adoption of the secondary plan. And I don't have anything else further to add. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. So for members of the public or those in attendance, there has not been any approval of any sort. This is the first time we're seeing this as a committee or even as a council. And that's why we're here. This is the public process. There was a public information meeting at one time. This is the first time that council is receiving this in a formal manner. So thank you. I will now ask France Kloib Hofer of AJ Clark and Associates and Roland Rom Kolthoff of Raw Design to proceed with the presentation. My apologies, France, if I mispronounced your name.
Actually, that was excellent. I do a lot of these appearances, and I have to say that was probably just about the best pronunciation of my name I've encountered. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
I was hoping that the clerk would be able to pull up our presentation.
I have, could you please confirm that you can see my screen?
I certainly can, yes. I guess I'll just ask you to advance the slides as necessary as we move through, Mrs. Clerk or Miss Clerk.
Please do, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Good evening. Once again, my name is Franz Kleipofer, and I am a registered professional planner with AJ Clark and Associates. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of our client, LJM Developments, with respect to an application for a zoning bylaw amendment for lands located at 3221 North Service Road, formerly an Esso service station within the Prudence Landing secondary plan. Could we please advance the slide? The subject lands are municipally addressed as 3221 North Service Road and are located at the southern limit of the Prudence Landing secondary plan. More specifically, the subject lands are located at the former Imperial Oil gas station to the north of the QEW and just west of the Antique Flea Market and Lake House Restaurant. To the north of the subject lands is the balance of the Prudence Landing secondary plan, which is currently vacant, with the shore of Lake Ontario beyond. And to the west is a rest area with some commercial uses, including a Tim Hortons and a Subway. These lands are largely functioning as a truck stop for the time being. Within the larger context, we have the Victoria Avenue interchange and associated carpool lot located approximately a kilometer to the west, as well as the Victoria Shores subdivision located just under a kilometer to the northwest with various industrial uses. Agriculture Canada also has a facility there, and the Foreign Affairs Winery is located just beyond. Will we please advance the slide? This next slide shows the subject lands within the context of the Prudence Landing secondary plan. As you can see, the secondary plan is outlined in the dashed yellow line, and the subject lands are located on the far southern limit, central to the western flank of the plan. If we could advance the slide, please. The development concept before you today introduces the future Prudence Landing neighborhood to a new and innovative design that is sure to be a landmark building in the town of Lincoln and at the western limit of the Jordan Harbor. A residential condominium is proposed in 2 phases. The first phase includes the west tower at 20 stories, and the second phase includes the east tower at 23 stories, both atop a 6-story podium. It is important to note that the building heights on the subject lands of generally 15 stories are currently permitted as of right through the Prudence Landing secondary plan. Substantial amenity area in excess of the bylaw requirement is proposed on the podium level between the 2 towers, which are separated at a distance of 25 meters. 431 dwelling units are currently proposed, which is a reduction of 85 units from the 516 units previously proposed. 540 parking spaces are proposed within the podium and 5 levels of underground for a parking rate of 1.25 spaces per unit, whereas the previous development concept contemplated a parking rate of 1.07 spaces per unit. That represents an increase of 0.18 spaces per unit. In addition, 312 bicycle spaces are proposed, which will take advantage of the future multi-use pathway system planned along the North Service Road. This path will provide connections to the existing regional bike path network. It is our hope that the construction of this development will contribute to the future energy and vibrancy of the Prudence Landing secondary plan by providing an early density of residents that would entice the necessary commercial services and attractions to make this area a destination for visitors throughout the region and the province. We can please advance the slide. Just a few notes on parking and access. Parking is provided via 5 levels of underground, as I previously mentioned, and 5 levels of podium parking. If we could advance the slide. The primary vehicular access to the subject lands is proposed via a full moves access off the North Service Road located central to the site, with loading spaces proposed interior to the building, flanking either side of the ramp that provides access to both the underground and above ground parking areas. If we could advance the slide, please. As you can see, substantial landscaping is proposed across the development concept and includes the future construction of the multi-use trail located along the southern limit of the site, as you can clearly see on this plan. You may also see a 3-meter planting strip or landscape strip is also proposed along the northern limit of the subject lands. We could advance the slide, please. Now, it's important to note that the units within the podium are mostly located along the northern facade. The reason for this is related to the traffic and noise impacts that emanate from the QEW. Units could not be located facing the QEW at the podium level, as those units could not meet the minimum at-window plane noise requirements of the NPC 300 provincial noise guidelines. So obviously this required a creative solution and resulted in a single loaded podium design that utilizes the above ground parking garage as a noise buffer to the units located on the north facade of the podium. If you look at this drawing, you'll see that the southern limit of the building is almost completely lined with parking. A fringe benefit of the proposed podium design is that it will also help to mitigate and insulate portions of the future Prudence Landing neighborhood from the noise emanating from the QEW. If we could please advance the slide. As the proposed development will have significant presence along the QEW, particular attention must be paid to the facade treatment along this frontage. The podium and building must be also of a bulk and size to compete with the significant width of the QEW right-of-way, which includes the North Service Road. We could advance the slide. We have provided here a conceptual treatment for the podium level as a potential idea to spur on thoughts that we will have to refine with town and regional staff through the future site plan process. If we could advance the slide, please. Equally as important is the northern facade, which proposes a 3-meter setback to the podium and a step back to the towers above of 6 meters from the property line. If we could please advance the slide. The tower portions of the development are of a curvilinear design that is almost wave-like in its appearance, and in that sense is somewhat reflective of the Lake Ontario shoreline to the north. If we could please advance the slide. It is our opinion that the details of the proposed structure are extremely unique and an elegant design that we feel creates an interesting and varied streetscape and skyline for the high-density portion of the future Prudence Landing neighborhood. Please advance the slide. Now, I see I'm running out of time. However, I'll quickly move through a couple of final slides that will address the massing within the Prudence Landing secondary plan context. If we could advance it from here as well, please. As you can see, the proposed massing of the revised design is not dissimilar to the surrounding high-density permissions of neighboring properties, which range from 12 to 15 to 8 to as much as 18 stories just to our east. Please advance the slide. It is our opinion that the proposed design strikes a balance between the future building heights within the secondary plan, while also maintaining a size and mass great enough to compete with the width of the QEW right-of-way. If we could advance the slide again, please. Oh, looks like we may have missed one. Why don't we advance it one more? So with that, that is the end of my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions or provide any clarifications that committee may require. Thank you.
Thank you very much, France. Certainly, I'll be honest with you, there is not a building, I don't think, higher than 6 or 7 stories within the town of Lincoln. So I'm quite confident that you'll be receiving some questions this evening.
Fair enough.
We'll start with Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair Michalak. I'm just wondering, I appreciate the presentation from Franz and AJ Clark. I'm wondering if there are representatives from LJM on the call, and if this would be an appropriate time to ask questions directly to them.
Mr. Kloibhofer?
I'm not sure if they are on the call right now. I was here as their representative to try to answer the questions. If you would like a question directly of Mr. Meehan, I can't say for sure if he is on this call or not.
Hi, yes, we are on the call, and
I'm here.
Yeah.
I see a gentleman with a hat on.
Absolutely. That's Mr. Meehan.
Perfect. Councillor Brunet, did you have a question?
Yes. Thank you, Chair Michalak, and I appreciate Mr. Meehan being on this call this evening. So, Mr. Meehan, my comment to you or your representatives, as we've heard from the chair, this is the first time we're seeing this application. Wondering if you could comment as to why you or your agents have been providing pictures and information on social media, alluding to the fact that approvals have already been granted, and as I understand it, taking deposits for units that might be representing a false expectation to potential buyers.
Thank you very much, Councillor, for the comment, and I appreciate the concern. Not a single person has ever taken any deposit on our instruction. That is totally wrong information that is circulated around by certain competitors. So I strongly reject that any of that thing has happened on the behest of LJM. And I have sent the CAO a very clear message that if there is any evidence, that should be provided to us so that we can reprimand. But as far as the agents are concerned, we have no control over their activity. People hire drone, make pictures, and this is happening everywhere in all municipalities. But I want to assure you that nothing happens of this kind ever, and there's no reason to happen. And very important point is that unless we have carry-on approval, we cannot sell or sign agreement, purchase and sale.
Mr. Brunet, Councillor Brunet.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Michalak, and to Mr. Meehan, I thank you for that very candid comment, and I take you at your word on it. I have an additional question, Chair. I'm not sure if I can direct this either to the representative from AJ Clark or directly to LJM or someone from RA, but we see in the report that there is a community benefit that has been being offered for approximately $300,000 as a cash contribution. And I'm wondering if someone from the development side could speak as to how this initial proposal was arrived at and the thought process that went into the $300,000 amount.
So I can speak briefly to that. I wonder if Director Bruder would like to comment on this, as it was something that was arrived at through various negotiations between the developer and the town. It is not finalized at this point, but it is in its first stages. And I think the $300,000 that was proposed here is something that is in keeping with other such developments within the region, but perhaps Matt would like to speak to that.
Bruder?
Certainly, Mr. Chair, I can speak to that a little bit. Yeah, we did have some conversations about this. There was a little bit of back and forth on what the community benefits would consist of. I mean, when it comes to community benefits, there are various options that can be considered, cash contribution being one, but there's also other benefits that could be realized as well, such as affordable housing, such as things like street beautification over and above what a typical capital project would include. So these are a bunch of things that were kind of considered as well. Some of the details still needed to be worked out. This was decided that we would come forward with this amount now, but there is some legwork that's still being done in terms of what would typically be done is to undertake an appraisal to make sure that we can properly value what those additional units, what that adds value wise. And then we look at that in terms of, you know, what's an appropriate community benefit solution. That's a viable input as well that we are working on. We've already commissioned that appraisal to be completed. So at this point, it was more, there was still some preliminary conversations and we wanted to bring forward something at least for initial consideration at this time, but it still needs to be finalized. That is true.
Councillor Brunei?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I did have an additional third question. It's regarding the regional brownfield development reduction charge program as it relates to the fact that this is an old gas station. But I'm wondering through you, Chair, if this is an appropriate time to ask that question, or should I wait for that until we go through the report?
I'm going to say that would go to the report that we'll be discussing afterwards. I think the questions we're going to ask right now are geared towards the proponents.
Thank you very much, Chair. Appreciate the opportunity.
My pleasure. Deputy Mayor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Franz or to Mr. Meehan. Just wondering if you'd comment. Obviously, you are well aware that we have a secondary plan with a 15-story limit on it. And I'm wondering if you can provide some context into your decision to go a great deal above that originally, only to be brought back a little bit, but still being quite a bit above that 15-story limit, and why you think that is necessary for this development.
Certainly, I can speak to that. I think what we need to consider is the current environment within the province with regard to housing and housing policies. We read every day that there is a housing crisis, and it's one that has really cropped up more specifically in the last couple of years. A lot of the targets that we look at in terms of achieving density targets through the growth plan are based on information and research that would have been completed in 2018, culminating in those final targets that came through in 2019. So when we look at what those targets are that come through in 2019, we sit there and look at what the demands would be and what the property would be able to support in terms of its contribution to those targets. And we've arrived at what we thought would be ideal at 28 and 25 stories. But through discussions with staff and through hearing the comments and working through the typical planning process, we've determined that it would be in everyone's best interest to reduce the height somewhat on this, down to 23 and 20 stories.
And can I add, Franz, if you allow me?
Fair enough.
Councillor, I'm a chartered accountant by training, 42 years. And I'm developing 22 projects in 15 municipalities. Let me tell you the stage where we are at this point in time. The construction prices have gone up with no check. If you do not have a building of 200 units and above, basically you are a donor. And then when it comes, because you are locking in revenue today, and the cost will follow 2 years later. As a result, you will never be able to build that particular project, and who will be the people who will suffer are the customer who have put their deposit in there. This is what has happened in downtown as well. Therefore, the size of the building, number of units has to be on that frame. You know, if you have less than this, you are unable to, really complete the project, I'm telling you. Besides, the size of the unit have gone down. Before it used to be 1,000, 1,500. So the GFA will be maybe the same, but the number of units looks more. but nothing less than 200 is viable option. I'm telling you with authority on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you both for that.
Fortunately, there's been no deposits made at this time. We're fortunate in that regard. Deputy Mayor Russell?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that response. And again, I just want to quick follow-up, probably to Mr. Behan, since I guess he did mention that he has a bit of an accounting background. What are you projecting your cost per square foot to be for these units, or for the building as a whole?
Okay, you know, it's different in the sense it's a range bound. Reason is whatever you order, that is what you get. The building of this size, which has a swimming pool, you know, on the 7th floor, we have a swimming pool and added. So the construction hard cost is coming somewhere 500 plus at this point. This does not include the soft cost. This does not include the development charges and all contingency that's coming. I'll give you just example of one. Plumbing used to cost 25,000 per door until we complete just Grimsby and another project. Today is 50,000. So if you have 400 units, that means $20 million more required to undertake that project. So this is the kind of, you know, escalation has gone up in past 2 years, 3 years time. Besides, you don't get labor, you don't get, you know, the material which is required. So it is very, very hard at this point for construction.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to add quickly to that to say that we are also very early in the process. We have not even started our site plan. We have no idea as to what the precise details and detailed design will be for this site. So it's also very difficult to assess what the cost per unit or what the price per unit would necessarily be with any great accuracy at this point in the game.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. One last question. Actually, no, I'll go up. Thank
you. Chariva?
Thank you, Chair Mikulak. Through you to the delegation. Question about community benefit. Okay, so we've got a secondary plan. You're leveraging the fact that it's a lakefront community, that there's going to be a path along there, that there's going to be shoreline protection, but you're only contributing $300,000, and your additional 136 units above the established limit of height at $400,000, which are being promoted all over Facebook, will generate $54.4 million. So $300,000 seems almost laughable.
Well, once again, through you, Mr. Chair, I would say that as Director Bruder noted earlier, we still are working through that process. We still are discussing it, but I would note that within the region of Niagara, what is being proposed here as a community benefit is not outside of the realm of reason and is quite actually in keeping with other community benefits that have been provided even by this developer. So that is something we'll have to look into. We'll have to discuss that further, and that is something that certainly will have to be resolved prior to the recommendation report.
Okay, because that's something that we'll tend to disagree on right now. And the same thing, and I brought this up time and time and time again, is that we've got zoning bylaws, and you're coming in with this, and you know the size of a where was it, like a one bedroom is smaller than what we recommend for a bachelor.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I mean, if there's an affordable house, I just help me understand what the concept is.
So I guess to speak through you, Mr. Chair, to your comment regarding unit size and what was deemed to be the best and most suitable unit sizes within the zoning bylaw, I have to admit I'm not familiar with what the background report would have been that established 45 meters for a bachelor, 55 meters for a one bedroom, or 65 meters for a two bedroom as being an appropriate size. I'm sure that Mr. Bruder would have been part of that zoning bylaw, and perhaps he could explain the rationale behind the unit sizes that are included within your zoning bylaw.
I'll put this to Mr. Bruder. Any comment as to what your thoughts are with regards to the size of an appropriate one bedroom or a bachelor?
To give you, I'm sorry, just to jump in, I do apologize, Mr. Chair, but and through you, our position based on the size of bachelor units, 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom, is very much based on Mr. Meehan and LGM's experience within the market area through a vast number of projects. I think you made a mention earlier today, Mr. Meehan, of 22 such projects in 15 municipalities across Southern Ontario. So that is the background of rationale that establishes, through Mr. Meehan's background, why these unit sizes are appropriate within this context.
Appreciate that. I suppose we're just used to hotel rooms being 300 or 30 meters. So, Mr. Bruder.
Yeah, just through Mr. Chair, I think, the size of the units, it is a little bit of a dynamic thing in terms of how the market goes, and the prices for some of the units according to per a square foot basis. So is there a little bit more play and of a range of what could be constituted as a sufficient size of a unit? I would say probably. I mean, our zoning bylaw does lay out the unit sizes, which is one of the items that there's being some relief sought. But yeah, I mean, I know that there's a little bit of a tendency to go towards rather a little bit of a different cross section of units that likely would contemplate somewhat smaller units as per the size of that. I mean, yeah, I mean, some industry research is definitely needed. It sounds like there is some experience in that regard here. I've not seen too much, to be honest with you, units of this size, but that doesn't mean they aren't there elsewhere. So.
Councillor Pachariva.
Okay, third question through you, Chair Michalak, and again, and we've saw it repetitively through comments from the public, is parking. So, I mean, 1.25? I've never seen an eighth of a car, or a vehicle. So, I mean, standard family has 2 vehicles. So if you're proposing, X number of units times 2 gives you're going to need like over 800 parking spots. So where are these additional vehicles going to park?
Yeah, fair enough, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Chair, I understand where you're coming from with that. I think what I'd probably do is go back to the previous conversation that speaks to the unit sizes that we're proposing here. We've looked at bachelor units at 31 square meters. We've looked at 1 bedrooms at 40 square meters. We've looked at 2 bedrooms or more at 61 square meters. I think what we're seeing here is a building that is really being marketed more to the young urban professional, a lot of people that are moving to this area. We're seeing more and more an exodus out of the GTA, and effectively, I don't know if anyone ever remembers the Price is Right, where they had the mountain climber going up that scale until they hit the price that was appropriate. What I think of that is almost like the Lakeshore West line, as people, young urban professionals, vacate the Toronto area simply because they can't afford those type of units. And they're going as far down that Lakeshore GO line as it is to the point where they can afford to buy a unit. That is largely what we're seeing in all of my other projects in the Western Toronto area, whether it be Mississauga, Oakville, Burlington, Hamilton, Grimsby, you name it. We see this movement all the way down the goal line, and that is really a function of the affordability crisis that we have right now. I think a lot of what you're going to see within this development are not large families, simply based on the target market that we're going after, the unit sizes. So I don't anticipate parking to be of a particular concern, and I don't think it is accurate to say that these units will be attracting families with 2 cars.
Councillor Pachariva.
Okay, thank you very much. I just, through you, Chair Michalak, I would just encourage you to sit down with our CAO and Director of Planning and come back to council with a proposal that considers, the issues that have been raised by the public and council, our committee this evening. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a question. I know we have some speakers to this, this presentation tonight, and I'm wondering if we are going to hear those speakers before we continue with these questions, or and will the consultant and the LJM folks stay on after those speakers to answer questions? I know there's a lot of people waiting. That's all I'm asking, Mr. Chairman.
This question I can put to the deputy clerk as far as process and procedure.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, after the presentation, we will receive the presentation from the applicant, and then we will listen to the delegations that have registered, and then we will move on to the staff report itself, and everyone will be on the call until after that motion of the report has been carried or completed.
Will Mr. Kloibhofer and Mr. Meehan be available to answer questions at that time also?
So at that time, that will be for questions to the staff. Right now is questions to the presentation, which is the applicant.
Fair enough. Councillor McPherson.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you to Franz and Mr. Meehan, and thank you for the presentation tonight. I will open by letting you know that I am one of the ward councillors for Ward 3, where this development is proposed. And I did sit in on the previous public meeting and listen to a lot of the feedback that you received during that call. So and obviously have gone through the report, as well as all of the letters that have been submitted to date. So I just wanted to open by talking a little bit about the Prudence secondary plan, because I was there. There in that, the Prudence secondary plan was a very, very unique experience. Started, as we know, in 2016, and it was a real collaboration between the town of Lincoln, the residents of Lincoln, and the developer that were all in attendance. The developer was in attendance at every meeting. So there was several meetings that were hosted over the course of a couple of years, and I would say that we had in excess of 100 residents at each of those meetings. So this was a fantastic public engagement to set the standards, set the plan for the Prudence property. So as we heard, it was completed in 2018. So, it's not that long ago. It's not like this plan was done back in the early 2000s or in the 1990s. This plan is not yet 5 years old. So I think that if you talk to the residents that participated and the developer, that everybody came away satisfied that the plan was a good one, that it incorporated many of the wants of, of the residents, and along with the wants of the developer. And I think we came to a good place, and we put together a very exciting waterfront community, with a downtown, with employment lands, with 3 types of density: low, medium, and high. So it was all the densities. So it did come off as a very good exercise, and as I say, very, very unique, I would say, in the region for engagement and for input from our residents. So just to put that in context, personally, I am not height averse. and I think where it makes sense and where it fits, I think that height works. I will also say that the agreed to secondary plan, as I said earlier, does have high density. So it's not that we excluded high density from the secondary plan. So where I do start to get concerned and have an issue is what I see in squeezing too much into an acre and a half. So I want to talk about density for a second, and I want to pose a question to you, probably to you, Franz.
Sure.
So in the Prudence secondary plan, the zoning that you're speaking about to the property you have is classified as high density. Already in the plan, 350 people per hectare. Your development is currently requesting approval for in excess of double that high density. That you are looking for 785 people per hectare, 124% higher than what is classified as high density. I wonder what you think about how that fits in Lincoln, in the Prudence development. I can see it fitting in downtown Toronto, and you make reference to Toronto quite a bit. I wonder how that fits, that 785 people per hectare fits in our community and in the Prudence development. I wonder if you could comment to that.
Fair enough. And you mentioned previously that you went through a very productive process through the Prudence Landing secondary plan. And I'm familiar with the timeline on that. And I did follow it through its development at that time. And I do know, much as you said, that plan was finally approved in 2018. But it is amazing what a difference a day can make. And the last few years are no exception to that. Since 2018, there has been a significant change in the planning paradigm. We have new provincial policy statements that were issued in 2020. We have a brand new growth plan that received royal assent in 2019. All of those increased the demand for, it increased the intensification targets through that across the province. And to say how it fits within the area, I think is important to consider the time frame of that recent approval through the Prudence Landing secondary plan. But equally, if not more important, it is to consider the provincial direction since 2019. I'd also say, as I mentioned earlier, with regard to the situation we find ourselves in, both as a province and a nation, we are in an unprecedented housing crunch. We see housing prices skyrocketing in terms of regional comparisons. And I don't think I made any mention to Toronto. I was just talking about the GO train line and how that affects out of Toronto, and how there is what seems to be at this point a mass migration out of Toronto to the surrounding area. What's important to note is that the intensification targets that are noted within that new growth plan that has occurred since the Prudence Landing secondary plan was approved are minimum targets. And it's important that we strive to do better than just the minimum. It's also important to note that these targets are general intensification rates that are applied to all built forms across the entire town. I would be willing to bet, and I don't know the exact percentage of the housing stock, but I'd be willing to bet the overwhelming percentage of the housing stock within Lincoln is single family dwellings. And in fact, I guess that it could even be upwards of 90%. And that may be something that Matt can confirm for us prior to the recommendation report. Provincial policy promotes intensification of all built forms. And the intent behind that is to really provide a varied and stronger housing market to meet the needs, not just of single-family homeowners, but a breadth of demographics and economics, and incomes, my apologies. High density intensification is particularly important to make sure that we're providing that particular element, only because it provides for a more affordable housing option as opposed to ground-oriented units. That means that where the context is appropriate for high density development, such as this, intensification should be considered beyond minimum targets to take advantage of those areas where intensification is appropriate. And what I'd submit is that intensification that we need to consider in all parts of the province is greater than it once was. And to be honest with you, we're seeing in Toronto, Hamilton, and some of those places that you're talking about, intensification rates far beyond 785, far beyond 1,000, sometimes upwards of 2,000. So when we look at what that is, I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that Lincoln is Toronto or that Lincoln is Hamilton. Those targets are far greater in what we're seeing in most of the developments that are coming up these days. And I think that what we have here is we're proposing a zoning bylaw through the RM2-16 zone that is not dissimilar than a property immediately to our west that has this exact same provision and fronts onto the North Service Road. It's virtually an identical situation. We may be a little higher, I don't debate that, but 15, 12 stories, we're not significantly higher. I would submit that 8 stories and 5 stories is not outside of the context that we're already seeing with 12 to 15 to 18.
Thank you, Franz. And I just would like to reiterate that as I said, I am not height averse where it fits and where it makes sense. And and I would also share with you that I am, and this council is very, very familiar with provincial policy, and you know, we understand the targets. And I would also say to you that 785 per hectare is way over our provincial targets. You know, that and what the region is going through right now with their official plan, I will put money on it that we will be nowhere near 785 per hectare. So you know, you can call out all of the provincial policy you want. The fact of the matter is, this is significantly in excess of the 350. And if you wanted to go on to 400 or 425 per hectare, okay, maybe we got something to talk about. But the fact that you are 124% higher than, as you say, the minimum density for high density, you know, we got work to do. We've got work to do. Second question, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, am I able to respond to that comment?
I will allow you to briefly respond quickly.
Fair enough. Thank you. And Councilor McPherson, I hear exactly what you're saying, but I wanted to reiterate what my point was there. I think we keep drifting between intensity targets, which are minimums, and going above them, but then also to focus on what the intensity of different built forms are, and to be able to have that appropriately apportioned across all of Lincoln is what's important to note here. It's not just a matter of hitting the intensification target. Provincial policy mandates us to hit it for all different types of built forms, to have that breadth of unit type and of built form to meet demand. And that's really why, in my opinion, that greater density on certain sites such as this is appropriate. And I just wanted to provide that clarification out of respect for the very pointed comments that you made there.
Thank you for that. So
Councilor McPherson, next question.
On the topic of parking, so for the information of the consultant and Mr. Meehan, our transportation master plan, which was completed in August of 2019, tells us that Lincoln currently has a car ownership rate of 2.1 vehicles per household, which, by the way, is higher than the Niagara region average of 1.7. So you made a comment earlier about who is going to buy these units, and I struggle with you calling out or focusing on a particular demographic that really you have no support to tell us that that's exactly who's going to buy those. To our experience, we are seeing migration from the GTA, from that area, and it's not singles. It's not singles. So my question to you is, and I think the whole size of the parking spots is another contentious issue, because when you're talking about over 500 parking spots, and you can't fit an SUV or a pickup truck in any of those parking spots, we got a problem. But my question to you is, how do we deal with if you are not right in your thinking that we're going to have singles buying these units? How do we deal with cars that will most likely be closer to the 2.1 per household than they are to a 1 per household as you lay it out?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Councilor McPherson, I just wanted to confirm the statistic that you gave me there, because I wasn't sure whether you said 1.2 per household earlier or 2.1. I know you said 2.1 later in your statement, but could you just clarify that number?
2.1 vehicles per household is where we were in 2019 in the town.
And that is for all built forms across Lincoln region, or is that for any specific type of built form? I don't know what the housing composition would be for something like that.
2.1 vehicles per household.
Per any household, no matter whether it is a single family dwelling, an apartment, or anything else. It's 2.1. That's kind of the catch-all bag that we're looking at.
Per household.
Okay, fair enough.
Per resident. Per resident.
Per resident?
Per resident.
Household, I think.
Or
per resident.
Per household.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for the clarification. Well, what I would say to that is to support the traffic, to support the parking that we're recommending on the site. We did have IBI group prepare a parking justification report. And what that parking rate justification report did is they did look at the ITE parking generation manual, and they did an overall analysis of other comparable sites using the built forms, unit sizes. There's a lot of different metrics that go into that. And I honestly can't claim to be expert on that, which is specifically why we went out and produced this report. And that report looked at various different studies and various different comparable developments. And in fact, that particular study came back with an ITE parking generation of 0.98 spaces per unit. So in formulating the parking justification and scenario here, that is what that study specifically revealed. Now, my client has decided for various different reasons, through discussions with staff and looking at potentially what the market would require, and increase that above what the parking consultant has recommended as a parking rate that would justify this particular development's rates, and has gone above and beyond that. Now, one of the things that I would note, as I've mentioned a few times, is that there is this affordability crisis right now. And one of the greatest costs in any development is indeed that parking, those parking spaces that are provided. We've seen numbers over the past few years that for the final construction of each parking space, and that includes the core, the ramps, all the stuff associated with any parking area, we've had numbers that range between $55,000 per parking space and as much as $65,000 to $75,000 per parking space. So this is something that is really important to most developers to make sure they get it right, because they need to tip the balance, not just between what the demand is in terms of parking demand and ITE parking generation estimates, but also what the market demand is. So there is a very big impetus on developers to get this right. And fortunately, what we have found through time is that these parking consultants, the parking and traffic engineers that do these studies are actually quite accurate. And if we can hit that right, not only can we provide the density of units that we're looking for, but then to also make sure that we're not providing too many, such as it offsets the affordability of the units we're hoping to construct. Now, with regard to the parking stall sizes, that analysis regarding the sizes will still have to be updated in that very report that I've referred to you. We will be, following this meeting, updating all the relevant studies, wind studies, parking studies, all of the studies, even my own report for the parking justification that speak to this new revised design. And that is part of what the parking consultant will have to provide an opinion on. And I would suggest that even as we work through that process, it might be worth demonstrating to you and to committee as a whole and the public that we are able to accommodate the maneuvering areas required for those parking spaces. And I think that we do definitely owe that to you.
Councilor McPherson.
If I may, just one more this go around. Please.
Just a quick one. If you could keep it brief.
I think this is important, a very important topic, and
absolutely,
it's very important to have the context around these questions.
Absolutely.
Ms. Franz, if you could maybe comment on communication that you've had with FBH. You know, I'm thinking about, you know, things such as shared services.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about, you know, you're going to have a neighboring building, you know, that will be built next to you, and you're asking for, you know, your build to be closer than what the secondary plan is speaking to. I'm thinking about things like the fit of your building within the architectural design guidelines of the Prudence property. I'm thinking about, you know, all of these things, and I'm wondering what communication have you had with FBH to date?
Okay, so let me break that down a little bit. I personally have not had any communication with FBH, but perhaps Mr. Meehan can speak to that in a moment. With regard to what is being proposed on these lands, I want to note that what we are proposing on these lands is the RM2-16 zone. That is the exact zone that FBH has on the lands immediately to our west. The only things that we're asking for increases on or relief for are units per hectare, the height. We've talked about the mix of the dwelling units, so on and so forth. We've asked for an increase in maximum lot coverage from 50 to 58%. But to offset that, I'd note that while the minimum landscaped open space is 25%, we are providing a higher level of open space by providing 33.8%, which is landscape, which means there's no parking lots, there's no usage for any utility paths or anything like that. So I think that that lot coverage matter is actually a fairly appropriate amount. I'm not sure. Now, I did read the report, and I see that on page 15 of 23, it's been noted that somehow we're asking for additional stories that go beyond, through our podium, that go beyond what is permitted by the RM2-16 zone. That specific requirement states that a 3-story podium is required where the building faces a collector road. We don't face a collector road. we face the North Service Road, which according to Schedule D1 of your official plan is an arterial road. So while it may seem as though through that shaded section that we're asking for relief on that particular zoning bylaw, we're not asking for relief for it. We are agreeing with staff to limit the height adjacent to the North Service Road, which is an arterial road. I'd also note that we meet all of the other setbacks, yard abutting a public street, interior side yard. The interesting thing here that I read though is it says rear yard, and it says it's not applicable. And the reason it says it's not applicable is because in that RM2-16 zone that applies to the FBH properties to our west, there is no rear yard setback. In fact, the 3 meters that we're providing is in excess of the 0 meter setback zoning bylaw that is required. And I've read the note here that staff inserted that says zoning typically requires 50% and implies somehow that a 10-meter rear yard setback is required. I don't know where that comes from. Perhaps Matt or Melissa can speak to that, because I'm not aware of that provision being a zoning requirement as noted within this column. And I think that that may be part of the confusion that you may be seeing with regard to the zoning amendments that we're requesting.
Mr. Chair, if I may go back to my original question, and maybe it is to Mr. Meehan, can you comment on communication with FBH?
Sure. If you allow me, sir, through the chair, if you allow, I can answer the councillor question. You have at municipality very competent and diligent staff, very capable, CAO and director planning that we have been dealing with. And it is their desire, and it is our desire also, to work together for the betterment of the town of Lincoln. That's the goal. And they had organized a meeting. I know Francisco, I have met him 3-4 times. We have lunched together. He's a nice gentleman. And Mike has specially arranged that meeting, and we had a discussion. Somehow he is not that happy right now, Francisco, but let me assure you, we are willing to work with our neighbors in the best of the interest of the town, anytime, anywhere, 24/7. That's our intention. Our goal is to do the best of the building there, and we are really helpful to them as well, because we are more experienced in Canada than them, and particularly in the vertical construction. And I can assure you, Councillor, you arrange a meeting and I'll be there with my team, and anything and anywhere. And I thank Mike and Matt for arranging all this and emphasizing again and again. So that's our intention, that's our goal, and this is what I'm speaking about it.
Thank you, Mr. Meehan, and I would encourage communication, certainly. I think that there's a lot at stake here for the town of Lincoln. It's a significant build, adding the almost 100 acres that FBH is building on to your 1.5 acres. So I would think that we need strong communication between the two developers so that we can build out the destination that we had envisioned in the secondary plan. Thank you, Mr.
I appreciate, but we should be allowed equal playing field, whether it is 1.5 acre or it is 100 acres. It does not matter. We are the client of your municipality as he is a client. So I think I won't take that, we have to be treated because we have a less people. The fact is that we are the one who are going to contribute significantly to the town. They have approval since 2018, nothing has happened. And you will see how speed we go and enrich the town of Lincoln for their betterment. But as said,
I see your hand up.
Thank you.
Ms. Shea, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make some clarifications regarding the zoning and some questions that have been brought up. So I just wanted to clarify the RM2-16 zone provision was approved by council in 2019. It was a site-specific zoning provision.
Yeah.
So because of that, the property that it was applied to does not have a rear yard. So that's why that's not applicable. In addition, because of the situation of that specific property, the building podium was intended to be oriented towards a collector road. So when translating the same RM 216 provisions as well as high-rise residential provisions for the remainder of the Prudence area, what staff have determined to be relevant for this specific site is a similar rear yard setback with other high-rise residential, which is half of the building height facing the rear yard in the situation for rear yard setback, and for the podium height, because the subject property does not abut a collector road, the 3-meter podium that's outlined in the secondary plan is still valid. It's just not specified for a collector road because that's not applicable here. I just wanted to make those clarifications.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bruder, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to build on what Ms. Shi was just talking about too. And I want to highlight, this isn't the first time that this has been brought up by staff either. I mean, like I said in my opening comments, we've been trying to work towards a concept that works on all angles, including interface with the development that will be going on in behind. So, I mean, this is something that we have been bringing up through the process as well, that there needs to be a greater setback. So, I think in addition to Melissa's clarifications as to where it came from, I just wanted to highlight that as well for you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Deputy Mayor Russell. You've already spoken once to this, so I'm going to go to Mayor Easton.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. If the Deputy Mayor has a comment that he wants to make that clarifies his earlier discussions, I'm happy to have him speak first. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have one question, and I'll try to be as quick as I can. Again, I am height and excessive density and massing resistant. So again, when I see these plans, and I believe me, I appreciate the job you both are trying to do, but you have to also understand that my role is to make sure that I interpret the provincial plan, our regulations within the town, and also the best interests of our residents. And when I look at what's being proposed here, I have a lot of concerns about that height. And I'm wondering, and I say this with all due respect, but I am very wary to approve anything above our 15-story secondary plan. So I'm wondering if you do have, in fact, a plan that does meet our secondary plan height levels. Or have you ever created a plan to meet those levels?
Mr. Kloihofer?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the plan that we have is the one that is before council.
Okay,
or
thank
committee.
Very much. That's all, Councillor or Deputy Mayor. Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Meehan, for attending this evening. I think it's very important to have the principals on site when such a development as this is on the table. Mr. Kloihofer, thank you very much for your presentation and for the justifications that you presented. I do want to go back. I've got a couple of questions. I want to go back and just to ask you, other than I think you referred to it as a housing crisis, or it was the cost crisis. And I'm trying to determine, because I look at the plan and I see considerable amount of flexibility in the negotiations that need to continue. And I'm wondering if you can provide us with other justifications than you've already given for the height and density over what was envisioned during the secondary plan process. I really am left with a feeling that I'm not sure that you really took it seriously as a community document, as a representation of where the community believed how we should be represented. And I have no argument with the appearance of the building or, you know, that sort of thing, but am I right that you think the world has changed that much that the secondary plan shouldn't be given greater consideration?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think that's the case at all. I think part of my analysis was a very holistic analysis. And if you look at my planning justification report, I go policy by policy to provide rationale for every policy that is related to this development. Did a very extensive review. And in fact, you're going to see an expanded review prior to the recommendation report that goes further than that. One of my responsibilities as a professional planner is to not just weigh the balance of what the secondary plan may say, but also to consider, in my opinion, how that secondary plan is aligning with new provincial documents. And that's a very gentle balance that we have to go through. I think I've provided excellent rationale within my planning justification report, and I stand by that.
Okay, all right, well, thank you very much for that. Impact. So I want to make absolutely clear so that I don't want Mr. Meehan and LJM to feel that there's any unfairness about this comment, but I do want to mention impact. So whether it's 1.5 acres or it's the rest of the property, it's all very important to us. Everybody has to be treated reasonably, and everybody is bringing a product to the council for approval. Now, the impact on 1.5 acres of such a development as you presented is vast. It's very, very significant. I suppose it could be, there's probably all kinds of justifications that could be used to measure impact. However, it does have a large bearing when we look at it, and you look at the massing documents, you really wonder whether there's any significance at all left for what has already been put on paper and what we've already approved. And when I look at the massing pictures, I'm not too sure whether they're 100% accurate. Have they reached the maximum level of accuracy? That's not a question about whether you would present inaccurate or accurate information. It's just a matter of, does the technology present us the comparison that we need to see? That's I think, the best way to present it.
Fair enough. And through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps if Roland is on the call from Raw Design, he could speak to the method by which these models are generated. I can assure you, Mayor Easton, that they are fairly accurate based on the overall layout, but I think we'd have to have Roland speak to the methodology behind the preparation of those models.
Okay, that would be helpful.
Well, the models were created using a program called SketchUp, which is used widely in the industry because it's very readily available at a relatively low cost. But we had the models of Prudence secondary plan, including some diagrammatic massing that we proposed either side of the harbor. And then we inserted our model of the existing buildings and the heights and the shape of those buildings, as you saw in the images that France showed you, and could compare them together. So it's always difficult to replicate any person's perceptions in the environment as they're walking through a city, down a lane, what they collect in their peripheral vision versus their immediate cone of vision. But there are accepted focal lengths like a camera that captures different views, and that's what we've shown here, and that's what Francis shared with you. So far as we know, these are entirely accurate representations so far as technology can take us to show you what the buildings would be in their end form.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Thank you. Thank you, Franz. I have another question. I want to speak to Mr. Meehan for a moment. Mr. Meehan, I'm not going to speak specifically about another development that you've that has been completed. I just want to point out that it appears to me, when I look at the massing, that that building to the west of Lincoln sits with an attitude of overlooking a variety of development, some commercial and some housing, residential, behind it. And this building that you're proposing appears to really overtake, when you look at the massing elements that Francis provided, it seems to take over the properties to the rear. And even to the point where I would suggest that it might be very difficult for people to accept, you know, even living under the, you know, underneath such a large and such a tall building, because there just isn't that much space involved. And I'm wondering, you know, whether, you know, if you had second thoughts about what we see now to the west of us. I actually drove through there the other day to see what the impact was, and that building is nowhere near as high as this one. What are your comments about that? I mean, it's not very often that you have an example that you can go to and see just exactly what the end result is going to look like.
I think our lead architect, Roland can explain really, because I know experience I had in Burlington. The tall buildings are required right on the road. And that is the, you know, principle, because any lower building will be behind it, you know. And they refused one of our buildings because it was not on the road. It has to be right facing the road. So that is the principle. I'm not an architect. Roland is the most celebrated architect. He can explain, you know, about the tall building and the, you know, criteria why the merits coming forward. Roland?
I'm not sure what to add to that, except that the buildings and urban form typically takes its cues from the hierarchy of streets that upon which the buildings sit. This building is proposed basically directly adjacent to the QEW, which is a huge major highway, a major piece of infrastructure within the province. In order for it to have the appropriate sort of visual weight and form relative to that piece of infrastructure, we think that this is an appropriate size and height for that. Moving closer to the building, we do have a podium which we've modeled at 4 and 6 stories, which are appropriate benchmarks for podia across the province and in many urban environments that we do our buildings. You're trying to create an appropriate pedestrian scale when people are close up to the building, and having the building terrace back above the 4th and the 6th floor is generally accepted as the principle that achieves that. Above that, the 2 towers are relatively compact in size. They're quite small. They're under 750 meters squared, which again is a generally accepted rule of thumb for the appropriate floor plate of a tower in the province.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm getting a sense of where you're all coming from and why there is a significant disconnect with the community and their view. And I can see why the councilors' concerns are situated where they're at. This is not. We had in mind for Prudence that there would be signature buildings, no question about it. We desired that. The plan that we developed, secondary plan that was developed, we believe was just about as ostentatious, if you will, as audacious as we could handle in this community. And we see a lot of very tall buildings in Niagara Falls, and of course we understand why they're there. So just let me close, Mr. Chairman, because I don't want to take up any more time, and I do have questions for staff later on. Franz, I believe that there is a very, very wide band of opportunity for some extremely good and fulsome dialogue and negotiation to go on. I don't have a problem with height myself, but this is not my personal opinion that we're dealing with here. I think what you're bringing us is another signature building. It has certainly been my hope that this entire plan would come together and that everybody would be, would receive fair hearing. But it really is the community that we are representing. And it is our hope that we can, that all of you, all of the experts will come together and not only use your technical and professional expertise with the design work, but also in your ability to negotiate with each other and come up with the flexibility that I believe exists. And maybe it's a good thing that you built that flexibility in, because we have a ways to go here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank Mayor, if you allow me, and just want to clarify one point. I'm sure Franz will do it better. That 12 to 15 story in secondary plan is for the building plus 3-story podium. That makes it 18. We have 6-story podium. So we are asking 20. So frankly, this has to be taken into consideration that our podium is 6-story, and that will protect from the noise from the QE as well. So Franz can, really speak about this,
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Meehan, and through you, Mr. Chair. I think I would like to note the comment that you made, Mayor Easton, with regard to working with staff and having the professionals put their heads together to come up with the design that carries the day and meets that ambitious plan that you put together and finalized in 2018. I've worked very closely with Matt over the last year and a half, and I have to say you have probably one of the best planning directors in the region in Matt Bruder, and it's an absolute pleasure to work with him. We've worked through a number of very challenging elements in this particular design. One-on-one, we've worked through them in design charrettes. There was a lot of very productive and informative discussions that went into the design that is before you today. And that's not to say that there won't be additional discussions. I'm sure there will, as you've noted. I do hear what Mr. Meehan is saying, and I think what he's really referring to is the provisions regarding 80% of the parking rate being applied to a podium level. And in this instance, simply because of the configuration of the property, the setbacks that were required to provide adjacent to the North Service Road, it makes it difficult to provide that 80% parking requirement if we are to also provide units on the north side of this property. So there are some unique challenges that come with the site that I think we've been working through very effectively. But I think that if we consider the fact that any of these developments that have permissions right now, whether it be at 18 stories, 12 stories, 15 stories, no matter what it may be, it may very well be possible that you could have, rather than an 18-story building, a 21 or 22-story building based on the provision of an 80% parking percentage of floor plate within those other permissions. So I think that's really the point that Mr. Meehan was working at. But to address your comment, Mr. Mayor Easton, I think you're absolutely correct. I think that there are definitely discussions to be had, and professionals do have to put their heads together to come up with a final design prior to the recommendation report that you can support.
Thank you very much for that. I believe that this is the essence of planning now. It is a very difficult position to be in as a community where there are at least a dozen people at any given time who want to tell you what your community should look like. Over 60% of our land is covered by the Greenbelt, but also, and so that means the Niagara Escarpment Commission as well as the Conservation Authority. And there isn't very much that we can do without having the world at our doorstep to tell us what to do. And so our only chance of really having success is the goodwill that comes to the table when everybody understands that there's give and take that it has to be. Our community has to be able to influence this. and we are the representatives. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'm going to, at this time, I don't see any other councillors with their hands up. I'm going to ask Councillor Brunet if he could assume the role of chair at this time. I have a couple, 2-3 questions myself. I'll try to be as quick as possible, as I'm a ward councillor as well.
Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you very much. Through you, Chair Brunet. To Mr. Kloivhover, on 29 of your report, of your appendix, page 29, I noticed where the secondary plan, we have a secondary plan where, there's 15-story buildings originally for where your site is located. What do you envision with the 4 or 5 acres to the north of your proposal? You came here with 20 to 23 stories, not feeling that 15 was enough.
Mm-hmm.
What are you envisioning for the property, the 4 or 5 acres north on the lakefront?
Could you direct me to the 4 or 5 acres, the parcel that you're specifically referring to? Are you referring to any parcel to our north? I'm not entirely sure what you're asking me.
Well, in the massing image, there's buildings that are significantly lower than your building.
Okay.
Your construction. Why are they proposed to be lower?
We are not proposing those buildings. Those buildings are taken from a previous concept that implemented the heights that are provided through the secondary plan. I don't have any particular vision for those lands, as there is no application for those particular structures before the town right now. So I don't know what our neighbor is envisioning specifically for those lands, as he has not submitted anything that I could comment on. And as a professional, I'm sure you can understand that I'm not in the position to comment on hypothetical applications.
Fair enough. Through you, Chair. So my concern is that should we be okay with 2023 stories, given the fact that we have a housing crisis? As you pointed out, the times have changed significantly. Would it be possible that, in 2 years from now or a year from now, that buildings would become 30 stories north of your development, of this development?
Again, I can't really comment on what a neighboring developer may or may not do in the future. I guess it would be something that they would have to consider and weigh the balances and the balance of their application, the appropriateness of it. That's not really something that I can comment on, particularly when there isn't any application before the town right now.
Okay, I understand. And I have another, I'm going to go down the parking. I know we've covered the parking quite extensively. However, I have a personal concern because my pickup truck is a Silverado, one of the most popular trucks on the road. And I'm feeling as though that a lot of these units are going to be short-term rentals, given the sizes of them. And, there could be that possibility right now that a lot of them may possibly be short-term rentals. And most tourists, they drive larger vehicles. So currently the parking spaces that you're proposing, my vehicle, I think I have 15 centimeters to open my door and get out if there's another car parked beside it. So there's a concern I have in terms of what people are driving nowadays, SUVs, Yukons, larger vehicles. So that's a concern that I have. Now, the question I have with regards to, because of this, knowing this, my truck is rather high. Would I be able to park my truck in the underground parking? Would I clear the underground parking?
I'm sorry? Are you concerned about being able to fit a pickup truck within the underground parking area is what I understand. And I have never seen an underground parking area that couldn't accept a standard pickup truck. Granted, there are commercial level pickup trucks. I'm not sure what the heights of those are, so that's difficult for me to comment on. But in terms of your typical vehicles, in terms of height, certainly that's something that could be accommodated in any parking garage of modern times. With regard to whether or not a Silverado can fit within the parking spaces, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's very important that we update our parking justification study to speak to these specific sizes prior to the recommendation report. But with regard to your comment regarding short-term rentals and the type of vehicles that tourists drive, I don't think that anyone here can really nail down what that standard would be. I'd also note that with regard to short-term rentals are always have become a big challenge in the planning world. And we're not really sure how to manage that. But what I would note that is under the current Residential Tenancies Act, whether it is a single family dwelling, a stacked townhouse, a high-rise condominium, any one of those particular units at any given time can become a short-term rental. And that is something that is afforded to a homeowner, whether it's your home, my home, the proposed units, or any other home or dwelling within the province of Ontario. That is a right that is afforded to them. I recognize and I agree that there are challenges within the planning world that other professionals and colleagues of mine are trying to address. Unfortunately, we have not come up with a firm example or a precedent by which you can control those matters. And I hope that it is something that is mitigated to the most degree possible in the future.
Appreciate that. The reason why, like, I have this personal experience driving that pickup is, you know, when typically these sorts of structures, these sorts of buildings are built in metro areas, and I can't use the parking garages of any of the hotels or any of the places or condominiums that I stay at. So this is where I have that personal experience.
Again, through you, Mr. Chair, I couldn't really speak to the details of any particular model, but what I can do is ensure that we update our parking justification study to specifically speak to the justification of these parking space sizes in relation to different vehicle types that the parking consultant feels would be appropriate or realistic on a site such as this.
Thank you very much.
Anything further, Councillor? We do have delegations waiting, so I think it's important that we move on. But if your questions have all been answered, I will turn the chair back to you.
They have been answered.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. There being no further questions of the presenters, I have a motion moved by Councillor Brunet that Council receive and file for information the following presentations from Franz Kloifer and AJ Clark and Associates and Roland Rom Kolthoff of Raw Design regarding item 5.2 zoning bylaw amendment application by AJ Clark and Associates Limited. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brunet?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Micklick?
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you. We have 4 individuals that requested to be included in the public hearing. Please note each delegation may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes. Once we have received the delegations, committee will transition directly into the report and motion. Our first delegation for this item is Lance Turcotte. Lance, are you there?
It does look like Lance has dropped off. If you'd like to continue, we'll reach out to Lance.
Okay. Our second delegation is Robert Thompson. Robert Thompson.
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead, Robert. Mr. Thompson.
Well, I'll say good evening again. The one-page notice in the paper from the town of Lincoln concerning this proposed amendment to the zoning bylaw hardly does justice to the enormity of the project being put forward. I think if the public notice had shown the monumental scale of the towers, I'm sure there would be an even greater outcry from the citizenry. In reading the material before the committee, I see that many others have made excellent submissions concerning the problems with the proposal, from the aesthetic to the practical side of things. How it will block off views of the lake, to how there are going to be 5 levels of underground parking that close to the water. When you look at what the developer wants in exchange for community benefits, the $300,000 being offered seems like a measly amount. My main reason for commenting tonight stems from a presentation made at a meeting I attended along with many others that occurred at the same time as the Solera place development was being discussed. At that May 13th, 2019 meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee, we sat through a presentation done by 2 men from WSP on a zoning bylaw review. During the question and answer time, I specifically remember Mr. Pachariva asked a question, and I paraphrase that. Why can the bylaws not be site specific? And if someone wants more than what is allowed, we just say no. If you want to build here, then here are the regulations. This is what I hope the town of Lincoln will say now. We need to have a council that will stand up and be prepared to negotiate for the community. Otherwise, the message will be, come and do whatever you want. An August 12th editorial in News Now gave a warning that a wave of development was coming. If a stand is not made early, then our town may be changed in ways we cannot control. What would be the point of things like an envisioning master plan for Vineland if we do not take control of the process? Members of council, I know that you have a difficult job. I appreciate you listening, but I also have one other question that goes with this. Why must the town planner, paid for by the taxpayer, have to work, and as I've heard, for 1.5 years with a developer who brings in a plan that does not satisfy the bylaws? I appreciate your time and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Once again, Mr. Thompson, do members of council have any questions for Mr. Thompson? Seeing none. Okay, we'll move on to our next delegation. Did we find Lance Turcotte?
I was unable to get a hold of him, so hopefully he is able to pop back on, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we will go to our next delegation, Darlene Gill. Darlene Gill, are you still there with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you very much for coming.
Okay, I wasn't sure how this works. First of all, I live in Jordan, just down the road on the lake, and I also bought my dad's house out of the estate in Victoria Shores. So I'm very much a neighbor of what's going on. I've also been a real estate broker in this area for 38 years. So I kind of see what's happening in the real estate market. I feel that the building is too big of a monstrosity for our town well, our area of Lincoln. If you want to, in Vineland, if you compare that to what's up in Grimsby they had lots of land and they put, I'm going to say maybe 6-8 story buildings. I haven't really counted them. And it's a massive there and it's a big chunk, but they have a lot of space to do it with. There was a lot of space across the street to put Costco and the malls and restaurants and places for those people to go. Even though, and I don't know the size of those units, I think that the size that they're planning on doing these is way too small. They're going to just get, if they get people to buy them, are going to be Toronto people who are single who come down here to live. and they have their one car to go back. And I think that's not really for the people of Vineland or the people of St. Catharines or local people. Our real estate market is invaded, and not by the people who live in St. Catharines and Vineland who want to get a house. It's invaded by the people from Toronto because they can't afford to live there anymore. And I feel that these people that are going to take these, right, you're probably right with being a rental and you can't take any control of that, and it shouldn't really matter. But you're not going to get any families wanting to be there. You're going to get the well-off people that are all single people that all have a car, and they all go out between 7:30 and 9 o'clock in the morning and try to get on the QEW to go to Toronto. And there's no jobs around here for these single, I'll call professional people. If they're going to spend $500,000, $600,000 a person, because you can't fit more than one person in these units, you're going to get people who are from Toronto coming here to live, or coming from Burlington here to live. And there's just no room for that many people in our quiet town of Vineland. It's a bedroom community for some of these people, and people from Toronto have come for a long time and driven back and forth to work, and had that clutter in Burlington that you can't get through to go to work every morning, Monday to Friday, to get to their job in Toronto, because they want to come down here and raise their kids in a quieter community, not with the rustle of whatever goes on in Toronto. This isn't Toronto, and you're going to make it look like a piece of Toronto in our Vineland community. And I think also the housing crisis, I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but the housing crisis around is for the families. It just keeps going up. My sister wanted to buy a house the other day, and she said that they're asking $500,000. And I went online and it sold in a few days for $600,000. Well, you can't even hardly buy it for that. You can't get a mortgage for that. My granddaughter has 2 jobs, and her 2 jobs, she's been saving for 5 years to buy a house, and she just can't catch up with the market. And it's just going to make more Toronto people come down, and basically individual people, not for families. And it's the families that need the houses. I would suggest, if they're doing it, I liked what Robert said, and I also liked what Councillor McPherson had said. But I believe that if you built the units also a larger size of 1,000 square feet, you might get the rich people who can now have to going to spend $800,000 on it instead of $5,000, and they will be able to stay, and they likely won't rent it out. You'll get more. You may get a family, a couple of parents and 1 or 2 children in something of that size. But this isn't Toronto. We don't have bus routes like Toronto does. All the people downtown Toronto, they get these tiny little apartments, so they got a place to live, and they get their bus to work. There's lots of public transportation. It's not here. There's no public transportation. Anyway, I think that's kind of what I was going to say. Thank you for listening.
No, we appreciate your professional thoughts and your opinions. Do members of the council have any questions for Darlene? Seeing none, thank you very much, Darlene, for attending and your delegation. Our next delegation is Dennis Seguin. Dennis, are you there? Van, do you know?
Yes, he was. Oh, Melissa, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, he did private message me and said he has to leave the meeting, but based on the conversations on parking and ratios, I see that there will be more to be decided on this development as it proceeds. Thank you.
Perfect. So he's comfortable with the discussion. Now, how about Lance Turcotte? Were we able to?
We were unable to connect with Lance. However, staff will work with the individual to make sure his comments are included in any upcoming report.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, thank you. And in addition to the delegations, we have received written correspondence from Sheila Dale dated November 1st, 2021, Ron Weiermeyer dated November 7th, 2021, Sarah Philbrick Bierfi dated November 7th, 2021, Brenda Sharp dated November 7th, 2021, Dave and Charlene Jennings dated November 7th, 2021, Robert Thompson dated November 8th, 2021, Sylvia Hoken San dated November 8th, 2021, and Charles Neville Ross dated November 8th, 2021. There being no further delegations, correspondence, or information for consideration, I now declare this public meeting to address the zoning bylaw amendment application by AJ Clark and Associates Limited closed. I have a motion moved by Councillor McPherson. The council receive and file for information following delegations and written correspondence regarding item 5.2 zoning bylaw amendment application by AJ Clark and Associates Limited, Lance Turcott, Robert Thompson, Darlene Gill, Dennis Seguin, Sheila Dale, Ron Weiermeyer, Sarah Philbrick Dierfy, Brenda Sharp, Dave and Charlene Jennings, Sylvia Hokinson, and Charles Neville Ross. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brunei,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariba,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
and Mayor Easton.
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair. Thank you very much. We will now move directly into consideration of item 5.2, Report PD-45-21 regarding the zoning bylaw amendment application by AJ Clark and Associates Limited. Do members of council have any questions to the report? There's quite a few questions asked already. We can keep them to the report. Fantastic. Mr. Kirkopoulos, I see your hand is up. I'm thinking you might have some opening comments.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I do, and just briefly, I think it's a good segue into some of the comments we heard before in terms of what our staff's role and why we find ourselves where we are right now. And I think one of the comments that was made is, what has Director Bruder and his team, specifically Melissa, been doing for the last year in terms of negotiating and why we would undertake to do that. I think an important part of understanding what the process is that we do undertake anytime any business interest of any sort comes in, it is one where we do seek collaboration. We do seek to provide clarity and interpretation of the rules. And I think there's a lot of people wondering, why don't we simply say no? I did hear Councillor Pachariba quoted in one of the comments. I think the uncertainty that often comes with going to the tribunal, where we ultimately may find ourselves if we simply say no at the initial step, means we have less control of the final outcome. And so I think what staff try to do, and what we've always tried to do, I would say for the better part of the tenure that I've been here, and even before that, is find the best compromise, the best intent for our residents. And so that's really what our goal is. Our goal is to make sure anything that comes through the door, whether it be a new business, a new development, takes into account all the issues that we've heard. We are trying to inform residents much more than we ever have. And with that level of informing residents comes this level of engagement, which I think is good. People are fired up, they're passionate, they want to understand. I think everyone has heard loud and clear council's desire for us to sit down with this particular developer. I think he's heard it. I encourage him to reach out to Director Bruder, to Melissa, to myself. If not, I'll be reaching out. But as I said, we do try to engage. We've used Speak Up Lincoln. We've used social media. We've informed residents. But I think it's important to highlight the role we play is to make sure what council has in front of you is something better for the community and that takes into account what people believe. Is that going to make everyone happy? I can assure you absolutely not. I've heard from many councillors who are unhappy with development and this particular development. Again, I think staff's role is to hear it, to provide our best advice, and to bring something forward that is better than potentially what could have been brought forward and what could be on the table. So I leave my comments at that. If there's other things that council has questions on later through the process, I definitely will be there to answer them. And again, I can answer any of the resident concerns or comments, whether they be about creating a bedroom community or otherwise. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments. Appreciate you keeping them under 5 minutes. Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair Michalak. I just have one question, and it's regarding page 18 of the report. Specifically, and I'll just read the paragraph that I'm just looking for some clarification on, either from staff or from anyone from the LJM that might still be on the call. So as we know, this was an old Esso gas station. I can recall over the years pulling in there to get gas many times. My recollection was there was a number of pumps and a small kiosk, but there was no garage or there was no large facility. So my question is, regional staff have noted that the property may be eligible for regional development charges rebates under the Regional Brownfield Development Reduction Charge Program. So I'm wondering, at this point of the process, has there been any environmental study, any remediation done? I'm just wondering, as we move forward, we're always looking at CIPs and looking at different reductions. I know there's nobody on staff and region on the call, but just wondering if either our staff or someone from LGM can comment on where we are with that part of the puzzle.
Melissa Shee, would you care to answer that?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. A phase 1 and phase 2 ESAs were submitted for this development application. In terms of eligibility for the region's brownfield development charge rebate program, the applicant would need to complete site remediation in accordance with the phase 2 ESA. And they would also be required to file a record of site condition to the province's brownfields environmental site registry. I haven't had discussions with the applicant yet on what they are intending to do, so maybe I'll pass it off to Franz if he has further information on that.
Thank you, Melissa, and through you, Mr. Chair. At this point, we have not moved to finalizing our record of site condition. Again, it's still quite early in the process. We intend to address those specific matters through the site plan process.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Michalak.
You're welcome. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a question with regards to infrastructure to the staff. With regards to water, wastewater, various infrastructure requirements, at what point do we decide that? And, when that is decided, and I would think it's based on the rest of the development for Prudence, and that this, this particular addition to the entire development, how does it impact those decisions? And does that come back if there is upgrades that are required? Does that come back to the developer?
Melissa Shee, what are your thoughts with regards to that question?
Yes, just with regards, through you, Mr. Chair, with regards to infrastructure improvements needed overall at a high level, the town is aware and has planned water main upgrade along Jordan Road to North Service Road, which would service the proposed development, as well as the region has planned their Laurie Avenue sanitary pumping station upgrade, which is also needed for the development. In addition, related to the Prudence Landing subdivision, there is future municipal sanitary sewers that will be constructed there that this development also will need to tie into. So in terms of timing, the development will need to wait for all of that improvement to occur before it can connect into those services. And in terms of formalizing the design, the detailed design of the municipal sanitary sewer as part of the Prudence draft plan of subdivision has not been completed yet. And so that process is expected to be underway soon. And definitely this development will have to tie into that in terms of analyzing detailed feasibility and design of that sewer main.
Thank you very much for that, Melissa. Second question, Mr. Chair, is I want to talk about access via the North Service Road a little bit. And when looking at the bigger development, I believe there is several planned roads off of the North Service Road. And I'm wondering why we would want to add another potential stop point, slow down point within, a fairly short stretch on a service road that does carry speed. When I think about, the number of residents that potentially could be coming out of these buildings, between say 7:30 in the morning, 8:30 in the morning. And, I think about somebody trying to turn left and head down to St. Catharines and, how difficult that might be. I don't see the rationale in creating another entrance off of the North Service Road when there is one to the east, and one to the west of this property and in very close proximity. Through you to the staff, I'm not sure who wants to take it.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It is something that we've looked at and something that staff do prefer. And we've had discussions with the applicant on a potential access to the rear of the property. However, because of the property boundaries, it would depend on collaboration with the developer to the north. I don't think the applicant has gotten there with that developer. So as a result, the access off the service road is what is being proposed.
Thank you, Melissa. And I think that's something that we need to, really take a hard look at. I guess for the record, for tonight's public meeting, I would like to see the density much closer to the secondary plan for the subject property. And I would also like to see the parking spots return to the size for the zoning. So those are a couple of requests that I think are important to make this fit within the Prudence property, within the Prudence secondary plan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor.
Chair, I see Mr. Bruder's hand up.
Oh, Mr. Bruder, sorry. I didn't, it's matching with the wall in your background.
No problem, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a couple additional comments just to dovetail in with what Ms. Shi was talking about as well. Just a little bit more on that whole piece of the sequencing of considering things like servicing, even some of the traffic implications. At the zoning stage, a lot of the time, what we're really doing is we're looking at determining feasibility, making sure there is a way to make things work, and looking at potential avenues that could be undertaken. But when it comes down to it, these really get defined, and we actually put a detailed plan together in subsequent kind of detailed design stages, whether it be a subdivision agreement, whether it be a site plan agreement stage. So, to that end, there's likely going to be certain tools that we can use with respect to undertaking kind of complex planning matters such as this, that include holding provisions, to make sure that we've got proper things in place from a servicing perspective, and that these things need to be addressed to the town's satisfaction as well before we move forward further. So those are typically things that we can tie in with zoning bylaw amendments too, just to make sure from a whole design perspective that we're achieving what we need to achieve with these items. So I just wanted to add that additional point as well for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My apologies, Councillor Timmers. I'll get back to you.
Thank you, Chairman Flick. Most of my questions have been asked already, but I certainly would like to make a comment before this part of the meeting is over. I personally believe we have a secondary plan for a reason. I have an issue with the height. I have an issue with the extremely small units, which I think are just not acceptable whatsoever. And I really would like to see, the compromises come forward and that we adhere to our secondary plan, that we spent so much time and effort and so much community involvement I would really hope that the developer will come back and really seriously look at our secondary plan moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Reimer?
Thank you, Chair Micklick. A couple of quick questions. Just to confirm through you to Director Bruder, probably. We've had a couple of comments from the presenter today about podiums and height. And so in our secondary plan, now these two buildings in our Prudence secondary plan are proposed at 12, are in the plan at 12 stories and 15 stories, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, at this particular property, there's height permission ranging from 12 to 15 stories for this property that are in the secondary plan. And what was envisioned in the secondary plan is that these buildings could have something as high as a 3-story podium, and then that height, that 12 to 15 stories, would be on top of that.
On top of that, yeah. So total, the total stories then is that podium plus the actual living area. And podium we're referring to as parking only. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, not necessarily all parking, but definitely that's one of the primary functions of that podium. Yes.
So under our secondary plan, there could be a 15-story building, one of them with a 3-floor. Sorry, I don't want to make. I'm not trying to be particular, but I want to make sure everybody understands, or we understand our heights, because height is a big issue. That's the big issue. So in reality, our heights are adding, or could add, 3 floors of podium underneath both of those. Is that correct in what I'm saying?
So through you, Mr. Chair, no, I think like what's being proposed here is instead of a podium of 3 stories, there's the additional podium required for the parking that's been identified, which is, I believe, Ms. Shi can correct me, I believe it's 5 stories, or it could be 6. Anyway, they're over and above what that podium would be in the secondary plan. So then we look at that additional height as the additional podium as well. They're requesting that kind of change as well.
Yeah. Okay. No, I just wanted to clarify that for our conversation.
See Ms. Shi's hands up. Ms. Shi, can you help us with how many stories? What is the overall height of this proposal?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify the maximum stories is 15. The intent of the podium policies is to ensure that at the base level of the building that there's appropriate pedestrian oriented height. So it's not excessive height. So that really it's a limit to 3 stories at the building base. And it's envisioned that tall buildings are a tower form. So the podium speaks more to the building form that's preferred rather than additional height.
Height, okay. So maximum floors is 50.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. And one more question, one comment. I might have missed it in the report, but I think we talked about, or there was mention of an architect hired, or a third-party architect to review or help in through you, Chair Micklick, to Director Bruder. Was there someone that was listed to help with this review?
Yeah, I can pass that to Melissa Shi. She's been working on this project quite a bit, and if Bruder has anything further to add.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Just recognizing the importance of this site and what's being proposed, the magnitude of it, we did take on additional design review. So we did hire architect Gordon Stratford, who is a subject design expert in this field. He sits on the City of Toronto's Urban Design Review panel and Niagara-on-the-Lake's Urban Design Review panel as well. So he helped facilitate a design charrette with the applicant and has helped to assist with design review through the last year or so.
So his comment, he has no official comments on this. His work is just reflected in this report. Is that safe to say?
Yes, we've been working with him together with the applicant back and forth, and his comments are are shown through staff comments on the design.
Thank you. And just to comment, if I may, Councillor Miklik, I am very happy with our Prudence secondary plan, the look, the way it was explained, the way it was envisioned, and echo some of the other councillors' comments on bringing this in line with what we had intended for Prudence to be, as with reference to density and height and parking as well. Thank you, Chair Miklik.
Thank you, Councillor Reimer. Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a question, Mr. Chairman, in regard to the impact of the construction on the north, along the North Service Road, and how it impacts the crops that are planted on the south side. But we have past evidence of change in the wind movement when the barriers were put up earlier and down near Fairview Road, I believe it is, Fairlane Road, and where cherry crops, where they were completely wiped out because of the inability of the warm air to be come off the water and move across the land. So through you to Mr. Bruder, have we considered this? And if you could just speak to that, I don't want it to get lost. I do want to make sure that agriculture is represented in this discussion.
Oh, if you can indulge me, I'll pass that to Melissa Sheaf first, and then if Mr. Bruder has any additional comments.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, a wind study was required for this application and did look more on the surrounding lands in the immediate vicinity of the proposal. And there were some wind concerns that were evidenced in the report. So that is an ongoing piece that we will need to work with the applicant on, as the proposed height that's before us cannot have any adverse wind impacts on other properties. So it's something that has been identified and raised, and something that will need to be addressed by the applicant.
All right, Mr. Chairman, through you then to Ms. Shi. Thank you very much for your
See Mr. Bruder's, my apologies. I see Mr. Bruder's hands up.
Thank you.
Yes. Sorry, just one thing if I could, Mr. Chair, just also, I know that was also a comment that we carried forward during the secondary plan process as well, just to make sure that we did factor that in. So definitely included within the scope of work, as we wanted to make sure, as Ms. Shi said, that was being evaluated. So it is something that we're continuing to carry forward. I know it's been a comment throughout, so I just wanted to reinforce that.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Yes, if we don't bring these things forward, then we just don't want to assume that they're all being dealt with. Mr. Chairman, the trunk line on 4th Avenue, as I understand it, when it was first installed to provide water source for Lincoln, the primary purpose was for agricultural use, not beyond agricultural use, beyond the basic water needs for the community at the time. I just want to make sure that we understand whether that's still the case, or do we anticipate that any residential development that comes along will be tapping into that trunk line? We're having some difficulty right now getting a definitive answer about a water source for agriculture in the Jordan area. And so I'd like to understand whether the regional approval was just for the number of houses that were identified through the secondary plan, or whether there's actually a capacity for anything more than that.
This is a regional issue. Mr. Bruder, I'll pass this on to you yourself.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I think I saw Mr. Kirkopoulos with his hand up, so maybe I'll let him speak first.
Mr. Kirkopoulos.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It was designed for potable and fire, not agriculture. And I will say, without getting into details, we have worked out a solution with the region as it relates to agriculture within the Jordan area and a water filling location, of which we will be updating council in the coming days.
Okay, that's very helpful. I would say that that is galvanized now. There shouldn't be any confusion in the future about that. Mr. Chairman, I just also want to say that, thank you very much, Mr. Koukopoulos. I just wanted to say that, you know, in having this very well-organized public meeting this evening, and staff haven't yet taken a position, I just want to reinforce my belief that there's time and certainly a lot of important discussions to go along with that to strike the right balance. And of course, using the secondary plan as a significant guide to everything that we're talking about here. And I want to reinforce for any members of the public who are still on the call that since I have been the mayor, that the direction that the planning staff have been given is really to continue to reinforce their value, not only in reviewing documents, but their value in acting as interpreters for the members of the public who are affected by so many decisions in the town, and also to use their expertise to act as negotiators, not just for groups in the community, but individuals who are directly, not indirectly, but directly impacted by any development, regardless of how large it is. And I've always been very satisfied with the fact that they were always prepared to get out of their offices, meet people wherever they need to be met, and to ensure that there's a fairness for the taxpayer in terms of how much information they have and to satisfy their needs as well as everyone else. You've heard me say a million times that I'm not a fan of here's the plan, how do you like it so far? Mostly we don't like it. So in this case, we had the secondary plan put in place to protect us from a lot of that. So I'm pleased to know that there's going to be an openness and much more discussion before we're at the end of this application. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Just Councillor Brunet, if I could get you to take the role of the chair, I just have one quick question.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. Through you to our fire chief, Mr. Hudson, I noticed there was no comment from a fire perspective. Looking at the renderings, how does fire access the north of the building? The north of the building.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. These issues will be worked out as this project continues along. It really depends on the final design and how many sides of the building are required to have fire department access and things of that nature. So conceptually, right now, we don't have a problem with it, but again, that'll be decided in due course.
Okay, appreciate that. I wasn't sure, looking at the renderings, there's trees everywhere. I don't know if you can drive through with fire trucks, so I was just making sure that that doesn't fall on. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Brunet, Chair Brunet. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor McPherson that council receive and file for information PD-45-31 regarding zoning bylaw amendment application by AJ Clark and Associates Limited, 3221 North Service Road, and direct staff to prepare a recommendation report once all comments have been received and any identified issues have been addressed. I will now ask our clerk, deputy clerk, to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brunet?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Miklik?
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
Thank you. That carries, Chair.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate everyone's time with this matter and questions and concerns. Almost 40 pages of correspondence, a year or more of planning. I think it's something new, 23-story buildings. It's definitely has a potential to create some serious change and the first of its kind within Lincoln. So I do appreciate everyone's time and questions. The deputy clerk will proceed to reinstate Councillor Rinjema to the meeting as discussion and voting is now completed. Devan, please confirm when ready to proceed.
Thank you, Chair. We are ready to proceed.
Okay, at this time, before we get into Economic Development Committee agenda, I'm sure we could all use a 5-minute break. Show of hands, thumbs. All right, perfect. All right, we shall reconvene at 9:20. That's fair.